Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into a world that once pulsed with whispers, shadows and candlelight. A world that lived and breathed under the wooden beams of Puritan homes and behind the tightly drawn shutters of colonial Massachusetts. We're returning to the quiet but charged days of 1692, to Salem village, to try and understand, gently, calmly and deeply, what really happened during the Salem witch trials. Before we begin this slow, wandering journey into the past, I'd love for you to pause and comment below where you're listening from, your country or city, and what time it is where you are. I always find it soothing to know where all of you are drifting off from, all across the map. Now, get cozy. Let your arms rest, let your shoulders fall. Maybe you're lying down in bed, maybe the lights are off and your room is quiet, or maybe you've got a soft lamp glowing nearby. Wherever you are, let's go gently together into a story woven from history, dust and silence. Let's begin. The year is 1692. You're in a small village on the edge of wilderness, a place where the wind doesn't whisper, it scratches at the wood. A thin crust of snow lies heavy on the uneven rooftops of Salem village. The world feels narrowed, fields are barren, the trees skeletal, and the roads are more mud than earth. You pull your shawl tighter, the chill clinging to your ribs. This winter is quieter than most, or perhaps it just feels that way. Life in Salem isn't fast, it doesn't roar, it rustles. You rise with the sun, you sleep when the fire dies low, you gather wood, you churn butter, you bow your head in prayer, not just once, but often. The sermons are long, laced with warnings, woven with images of fire and damnation. The devil is not a metaphor here, he's real, he's watching, and more than that, he's tempting. Your home is made of timber, simple and strong. There are 4 of you, or 6, or 10, depending on who has survived the last season. The days are mostly the same: work, worship, worry. The world outside the village is vast, wild. Inside, it's even more dangerous, because trust here is fragile. Honor is everything. Sin, even imagined, can rot through the strongest name like worms in fruit. At the centre of Salem village stands the meeting house, a wooden draughty building that serves as both church and court. Reverend Samuel Parris preaches from the pulpit every Sunday, with a voice that thunders more than it soothes. He speaks of hell, of temptation, of the devil's cunning. And lately, he's been speaking of witchcraft. You've heard stories, tales of witches who ride through the skies, who spoil milk, wither crops, and send children into fits. But these are stories, aren't they? Still, in Reverend Parris's home, something strange is happening. His niece, Abigail Williams, and his daughter Betty have begun to behave in ways that make your skin crawl. They scream in church, they twist their bodies into unnatural shapes, they shout strange words and complain of invisible forces clawing at their skin. And when the doctor comes, for there is only one in the area, he offers a diagnosis that will change everything: witchcraft. You hear it on the wind first. A name, then another, then more, not shouted, but whispered, always whispered. The girls have begun to point fingers. First, it's to Tuba, the enslaved woman from Barbados who works in Reverend Parris's kitchen. People say she knows magic, that she talks of omens, that she makes witch cakes of rye and urine to identify the cursed. You've seen her before. Her voice is soft, her eyes always looking away. When they accuse her, she does not scream or deny. Instead, she confesses. That moment, soft, strange, barely understood, is where it truly begins. In the flickering firelight of February, Tituba tells of the devil. She says he came to her as a tall man, dressed in black, asking her to sign a book, and others, she claims, have signed too. You shiver. Not from the cold, from something else. Suddenly the devil isn't a distant fear. He's in Salem. He's among you. And worse, he might be someone you know. From that point on, your quiet village will unravel. One girl after another joins the afflicted. Their seizures grow more dramatic, their accusations more confident. Neighbours turn wary, families splinter. You feel it. A tightening, like the air itself is being pulled taut with suspicion. No longer is a knock on the door just a knock. No longer is a prayer just a prayer. They've begun to arrest people, ordinary people, midwives, widows, women who spoke too freely, men who question too much, and each arrest is accompanied by the same image of a cold cart rolling through muddy streets, of iron shackles, of the meeting house now echoing with cries not of joy or song, but of accusation. And you're just trying to survive, to stay small, invisible. Because here in Salem, 1692, the line between safety and suspicion is vanishing fast. Tonight, let that thought drift like snow over your thoughts. That fear can grow roots even in the coldest soil. That belief, when mixed with power and panic, can turn even the most righteous hands into trembling weapons. Let the silence of this first part settle over you like a heavy wool blanket. You are here, you are warm, you are safe, and the story, the long unravelling, has only just begun. Tituba's confession spreads like fire on dry wood. Her voice, once soft and hesitant, becomes a strange kind of beacon in the frightened dark. She speaks of animals that speak with men's voices, of women who fly, of books bound in leather that require blood for ink. She names names, and the names she gives are ones the village already half expects to hear. Sarah Good, the beggar woman who mutters to herself, often barefoot, trailing children behind her like shadows. Sarah Osborne, old, ill, who hasn't been to church in over a year, her absence a sin as damning as any hex. These women, already living on the frayed edge of society, become perfect vessels for the fears everyone has been silently feeding. You walk the road past the meeting house, and people no longer look one another in the eye. Everyone listens now more than they speak. Every creak of wood, every sick cow, every spoiled pie becomes something more than bad luck. The girls, Betty, Abigail, Ann Putnam, Mercy Lewis, they fall deeper into their afflictions. Their limbs stiffen, their mouths twist, their words lose all shape. They accuse, they tremble, they scream, and all the while their parents, their ministers, the magistrates, men like John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, watch with narrowed eyes and ink-stained fingers. A special court is called in Salem town, a more bustling settlement than your quiet village. This court is not ordinary. It is charged with hunting witches, with finding evil rooted in human flesh, and the evidence allowed, spectral evidence, is like smoke in your hands. It means that if someone claims your spirit appeared to them in a dream, or choked them in their sleep, it is taken seriously, not laughed away, not even questioned. You don't need poppets or potions, not broomsticks or black cats, only belief. And belief, in this place and time, is more powerful than anything else. The jails fill. The jails are not what you'd imagine. They are cold, damp rooms beneath buildings, sometimes barely lit, often shared by rats. Children are imprisoned too, like Dorcas Good, Sarah's daughter, just 4 years old. She's questioned, and under pressure, she says what the adults want her to say, that her mother gave her the devil's book. Men are not spared either. Giles Corey, strong and silent, is accused alongside his wife, Martha. He does not confess. Later it will cost him dearly, but for now he watches as others falter. You begin to lose track of the days. Accusations fall in clusters, and when you walk through Salem village you hear the names whispered as if they are spells themselves. Rebecca Nurse, quiet and devout. Elizabeth Proctor, who speaks her mind and keeps to herself. Reverend George Burroughs, who once preached here and left under tension. Even when someone is respected, even when someone prays with tears and quotes scripture with trembling lips, it does not protect them. In fact, it makes them more dangerous in the eyes of the court. Who better for the devil to choose than someone who pretends to be pure? The court believes it is doing God's work. They are saving souls by condemning flesh. They call it justice. But you see something else in the eyes of those who accuse: envy, bitterness, grief that has curdled into hate. Old land disputes are remembered, grudges unearthed. The Putnams, powerful and heavy with grief after losing children to illness, are among the most fervent accusers. Their daughter, Ann Putnam Jr., sees witches everywhere, and her parents believe her, or want to, because the alternative, that the devil is not real, that this is all human cruelty, is too terrible to face. Spring turns to early summer, and now executions begin. Bridget Bishop is the first to hang. She's a woman known for her bright clothes and sharp tongue, someone who never fit the mould. She's convicted and taken to Gallows Hill, a rocky ledge just outside town. No one wants to speak of the hanging afterward, but you hear the murmurs, that the rope was tight, that she died slowly. that the crowd was silent. No one cheered, no one prayed. Just silence, the kind that fills a church when no one believes anymore. And still, the trials continue. More confessions, more accusations. Some confess to save themselves. Some refuse to lie and pay the ultimate price. Every night the jailers bring food to the cells, and every morning they pull someone else to court. And the afflicted girls, they still tremble, still point, still cry out in sudden pain. They have become a kind of chorus, one that no longer needs prompting. The village listens to them more than it does to ministers, to parents, to reason. You begin to question things you once knew. Can the devil truly enter a person and twist them so? Can he make a girl scream just by looking at someone? Can you trust your neighbours or yourself? When you pray, does God hear you or someone else? And still the list grows. More names, more shackles, more whispered confessions. The jail overflows, and Salem, once just a small village on the edge of wilderness, becomes something else entirely. A place where fear wears a face you recognise, where justice becomes a ritual, and where silence no longer means peace, it means you're next. The story, like the wind across the marshes, does not slow. Not yet. By midsummer of 1692, Salem is no longer a place you recognise. The trees still rustle, the church bells still toll, but the sounds don't carry the same meaning. They echo differently, heavier somehow. A bell once meant Sunday, or a wedding, or mourning. Now it means another trial, another verdict, another soul in peril. You move about your days like someone walking across thin ice, each step measured, every word watched. At the heart of it all is the courtroom. It's not a grand hall, not even large. It's plain, wooden, and suffocatingly hot in the July air. The windows are cracked open, but the stillness inside keeps the sweat clinging to your back. The magistrates sit at the front, Hathorne, Corwin, and now the new arrival from Boston, William Stoughton, the deputy governor. He's the kind of man who speaks with finality, whose eyes flick past pleas and explanations and settle only on guilt. You sit at the back, maybe on a bench, maybe standing by the wall. You watch and you listen. The afflicted girls are brought in, their dresses neat, their faces pale but composed, until the accused enters. Then it begins. The fits, the shrieks, the collapse into spasms and gasps. They claim to see spectres, twisted faces, claws instead of fingers. They shout that their flesh is burning, that a yellow bird is pecking at their eyes, that the accused is biting them with their spirit floating above untouchable, and the accused, usually a woman, sometimes a man, stares back, hollowed by days in prison, voice breaking from protest. I never did such things, they say. I am innocent. I know not what they speak of. But the court listens to the girls. Their pain is real. Their suffering is plain. Rebecca Nurse stands accused now. You know her. Everyone does. A grandmother, a churchgoer, a woman of calm voice and kind hands, and yet, even she stands here, facing death. When she's first found not guilty, the girls scream louder. The judge hesitates. The jury is asked to reconsider, and then the verdict is reversed. She is condemned. It's not only the accused who falter, it's the entire village. Farms go untended. Children are left to fend for themselves. The minister, Reverend Parris, still thunders about sin, but even his words sound thinner now. There is unease even among the righteous. The people who once sat together in church now sit apart. A sideways glance, an unfinished sentence, a poorly timed silence. Any of it can be interpreted. The jail, now holding more than 100, is filled with noise, murmured prayers, coughing, soft crying. The accused sleep on straw. Food is meagre. Some begin to confess, though the truth of those confessions is impossible to grasp. Take Deliverance Hobbs, for instance. She says she signed the devil's book. She says others did too. But did she truly believe it? Or did she say it to survive? You wonder, and you do not know. Outside, Gallows Hill waits. They do not bury the hanged. Their bodies are placed in shallow pits, denied consecrated ground. Families are forbidden to mourn, yet some come at night, digging with bare hands under the moonlight, stealing back what little they can of their beloved. You hear of this from neighbours and from whispers on the wind, and now more accusations reach beyond Salem village, Ipswich, Andover, Gloucester. The fever spreads like smoke between trees. No longer is it a local matter, it is a colony-wide dread. Even those who once cheered the trials begin to wonder, how many witches could there possibly be? Still, the court presses on. Stoughton presides with firm resolve. He allows spectral evidence, those dreams, those visions, the unprovable. If a girl says she sees your spirit tormenting her, it is enough. The logic is circular. If you deny it, it proves you lie. If you confess, you confirm the court's righteousness. There is no escape. In August, 5 more are hanged. One of them is George Burroughs, the former minister. When he is on the ladder, he recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly. This should be impossible, according to Puritan belief. A witch cannot say holy words. The crowd falls silent. Some begin to doubt. But it is too late. He is pushed. The rope takes him like the others. You no longer sleep easily. Not because you fear the devil, but because you fear people who claim to speak for God. You fear that the truth has become something bendable, stretched by fear and pride. You wake in the middle of the night, sure you heard footsteps outside, or saw a face at the window, but it's only your own thoughts echoing back. You hear rumours now of people beginning to question the court, of ministers like Increase Mather and his son Cotton, who begin to warn against too much trust in invisible evidence, of quiet talk that perhaps the afflicted girls are not holy vessels but something else entirely. Still, the executions continue. The rhythm has become familiar. Accusation, arrest, trial, confession or silence, the climb up the ladder, the creak of the rope, and in the middle of it all you keep living, feeding chickens, boiling water, mending clothes. Life does not stop, even as the world reshapes itself. You wonder if it will ever go back, if the trust will return, if the fields will grow. But for now, the gallows cast a long shadow, and Salem, once small and forgotten by the world, becomes a place remembered for something terrible, and it is not over yet. By September, the air grows cooler and sharper, the first signs of autumn beginning to crisp the edges of the leaves. The sky above Salem no longer feels endless. It seems to press downward, tighter, closer. There's a stillness now, not the stillness of peace, but of exhaustion. The trials have become routine, almost mechanical. Names are given, arrests made, jailers dispatched, ropes prepared. The court functions like a machine, slow, deliberate, unforgiving. And in this rhythm of fear, something begins to crack. On the 15th of the month, Giles Corey, aged, stubborn and silent, refuses to plead. He says nothing at his arraignment. No confession, no denial, no answer at all. According to the law, if a man will not plead, he cannot be tried, and if he cannot be tried, his land cannot be seized. He knows this. He also knows that if he confesses falsely, his name is ruined, and if he is tried and found guilty, his land will pass to the state. His silence is not defiance. It is strategy, and it is love. He does it to protect his family. The punishment for silence is death by pressing. A pit is dug, boards placed on his chest, and heavy stones added one by one. You hear about it from a neighbour who has seen it, though they speak of it only once, and only in a whisper. For 2 days Giles Corey lies beneath the weight. Each time the sheriff asks for a plea, he utters the same words. More weight. You feel something stir inside you when you hear this. Not admiration, not pride, but a cold, quiet horror. This is what it has come to. An old man crushed by stones so his sons might inherit a few acres of earth. The air in Salem grows thin. The court, so confident in early summer, now moves with a kind of haunted momentum. More people confess, but their stories grow inconsistent, their details tangled. Some begin naming the same people who already hang from the gallows. Others accuse respected figures, even members of the court. And then, on September 22nd, 8 more are hanged. Mary Easty among them, sister to Rebecca Nurse. She had written a petition before her death, asking that the court pause, that the trials be examined. She had confessed once, out of desperation, and then recanted, saying she had lied. She asked only that no innocent person suffer as she had, but her words went unanswered. You're beginning to feel something heavy in your chest, something hard to name. It is not grief exactly, though you have lost friends and neighbours. It is not anger, though you felt that too. It is something else, an ache for reason, for quiet, for a return to what was. But what was no longer exists. And then, finally, something begins to change. A minister in Boston, Increase Mather, publishes a tract. He argues that it is better for 10 witches to go free than for one innocent to be condemned. This is not a new idea, but it is the first time someone of his influence says it out loud. People listen. Cotton Mather, his son, follows him in tone, if not entirely in content. The winds shift. Governor Phipps, returned from military duty in Maine, hears of the chaos and halts the proceedings. The Court of Oyer and Terminer, the one built solely to try witches, is dissolved. The new court is formed, with stricter rules, and spectral evidence is no longer allowed. It seems like the fever is breaking, but for many it is too late. You pass by the jail one morning and hear a woman singing to herself behind the wall. Not hymns, but something older. A lullaby, maybe. Her voice is cracked and quiet, but the song carries, thin and strange on the breeze. She's still awaiting trial. No one has come for her yet. Her name may not have been called. The ground beneath Salem feels altered. Not physically, but in the way people look at it. You see it in the faces around you, in the way eyes no longer meet, in the way neighbours once warm now pass without a word. Children speak less. They've seen too much. They've heard things no child should hear. Some have watched their mothers taken away in carts. Others have watched their fathers testify against them. And through all of it, the afflicted girls remain. Their fits lessen, though no one says why. Some suggest they've been cured by the justice served. Others whisper that they no longer feel safe to perform. There is a growing murmur that they were never afflicted at all. You wonder which is worse, that they were victims of something invisible and terrible, or that they weren't. One of the judges, Nathaniel Saltonstall, had resigned early in protest, but most others remain. They do not speak of regret. Not yet. Not openly. Some still believe they were doing God's work. Others are simply quiet now. You stand in your doorway in the early morning, watching mist curl low over the fields. The harvest is weak. Many hands are missing. The village no longer rings with the usual rhythms of work and prayer and gossip. It feels as if something precious has been carved out of the land and not returned. But life, like a stream, begins to move forward again, slowly, cautiously. The court will meet once more, the last of the prisoners still to be addressed. Some will be released. Others will remain locked away until someone pays their jail fees. There is no apology, only silence. No mourning, only forgetfulness. And you, like everyone else, will continue. Not because you want to, but because there is no other choice. And because history does not pause for reflection. It only ever marches on. October settles over Salem like a hush after shouting. Not peace exactly, but the aftermath of something that cannot be undone. The fields are bare, the trees have thinned, the mornings are sharper now, and when you step outside the world feels quieter than it did in the summer. Fewer carts in the road, fewer voices from open doors. It's not just the cold, it's what remains in the air, in the spaces between words. The Court of Oyer and Terminer is gone, dissolved by Governor Phipps as quietly as it was formed. But the jail is still full, and over 100 people remain imprisoned, some since spring. The new Superior Court of Judicature, formed in December, will meet in the coming months, but with stricter rules. No more spectral evidence, no more convictions on dreams and apparitions. But for now, those accused still sit behind bars waiting. You walk past the meeting house and catch sight of Reverend Parris through the window. He looks thinner. There are dark crescents beneath his eyes. He continues his sermons, but his voice no longer carries the same authority. Fewer people come to listen. Some say he's afraid. Others say he should be. His household was where the spark began, with his niece, Abigail, and his daughter, Betty, now both vanished from public view. The girls, once centres of attention, have become ghosts of their own making. And still, even as the court slows and the executions cease, there is no reckoning. No apology from the judges, no explanation from the ministers who called it righteous. The dead remain unnamed in sermons. The condemned, even the innocent, are not yet pardoned. The village simply moves on, but limping. You pass by Gallows Hill one evening, the sky dimming fast, clouds hung low over the ridges. There is no marker, no cross, nothing to say what happened here, but you know, you remember. The ground there does not feel ordinary, it feels bruised. The stories say the bodies were buried shallowly, quickly. Some reclaimed by families in secret, others left to the soil. You've heard the stories of children sneaking to the site to dare each other to touch the earth. You wonder if they know what it means, if they understand that it wasn't witches who died there, but people. Among the prisoners, those who confessed long ago begin to stir. They had spoken names under pressure, names of friends, neighbours, kin. Some of them begin to retract those confessions. They claim they were forced, threatened, promised mercy. Others stay silent. The damage is done, and their words hang in the air long after they're spoken. Elizabeth Proctor is still in jail. Her husband John was hanged in August. She carries his child now. Her sentence is postponed for that reason alone. You think of her often, how she once sat in the same meeting house pews, how she once walked freely down the village paths. Now she waits behind thick walls and locked doors, her future as uncertain as the season. Some families begin to leave, not loudly, not all at once, but you notice it. Farmsteads abandoned, smoke no longer rising from chimneys. Some can't stay where it happened, others are no longer welcome. Accusers and the accused live side by side now, and the boundary between them is a wound that hasn't healed. You see it in every silent meal, every half-finished greeting. The afflicted girls are scattered. Anne Putnam still walks the village paths, but she's quieter now. Her mother wears black more often. Others have vanished to neighbouring towns or back into private homes. No one dares ask what they saw, what they truly believed. There's a fear that if you press too hard, if you demand too much, it will all begin again. And so silence becomes the language of survival. But it is not entirely still. Here and there you hear new voices. Samuel Sewell, one of the judges, stands before the congregation and admits fault. He says he was wrong, that he was misled, that blood was on his hands. He stands alone, a single figure in the aisle of a cold church, head bowed. And though no one joins him, not yet, it is the first public crack in the foundation. Later, others will follow. Years later, the colony will attempt reparations. Families will receive small payments, symbolic gestures. Some accused will be cleared by name, others forgotten. The apology will be slow, incomplete. History will turn its face away before fully looking back. You walk through the village one last time that month and see children playing near the old tree line, voices high and breath misting in the cold. They laugh, they run, and for a moment it almost feels like it did before. But you know too much now. The innocence of this place is gone, and what remains is something thinner, something hollowed out. Salem is not healed, it is simply surviving, and somewhere, deep in the frozen ground beneath Gallows Hill, the names of the dead remain, spoken only in quiet moments, never in church, never in the courts, never on the lips of those who condemned them. But you remember, winter settles over the village like a heavy quilt stitched with silence and snow. The sky hangs low and leaden, the trees stripped bare. Salem breathes differently now, less like a town and more like a place remembering something it can't quite speak aloud. Everything has slowed, the trials have paused, the gallows stand unused, but the weight of what has happened presses down with every snowfall, with every gust of wind howling through the eaves. You wake to frost clinging to the inside of the window glass. The hearth fire, long gone to embers, barely warms the room. There is no news, not really, but there are stories, always stories, that more of the accused are being quietly released, that the remaining prisoners, those who never confessed, those who waited it out, will be freed once the new court reviews their cases. But even those who are released will not return unchanged. Some are gaunt, half-starved, others ill with fever or madness. Some do not speak at all, and then there are the ones who never come back, the ones whose names no one says. The snow begins to cover the village like a shroud. The paths are buried, and the forests that ring the settlement are hushed beneath white. You walk the same narrow roads from house to meeting house, from well to woodshed, and yet everything looks different now. Some homes are shuttered for good, others bear the slow, quiet repairs of people trying to forget. But forgetting isn't possible here, not truly. Inside you listen to the stories. They've shifted now, not about witches, not anymore, but about how it all happened, about how it could have happened, and what it meant. Some still defend the trials. They say the devil is cunning, that he could possess the innocent, that the court did what it had to, but fewer speak that way now. The village has seen too much. The Grief has changed the shape of the town. In the meeting house, the benches are half empty. Reverend Paris continues to preach, his voice thinner, his certainty worn down like an old blade. He has enemies now, many. People murmur that he encouraged the panic, that he used it for his own standing, that he allowed the girls, his niece included, to wield a power they never should have had, that he stood by while women were hanged and men crushed and children jailed. There is talk that he should resign, leave the village, begin again somewhere new. But for now he remains. The sermons continue, the prayers continue, but the trust is gone. Outside the village, the colony is watching. The court in Boston, the ministers, the landowners, they've all heard what happened here. The deaths, the confessions, the strange, absurd logic that held it all together. They're cautious now. The trials will not return. Not like this. They will not allow it. But even this is not justice. It is preservation. A closing of ranks, not an opening of eyes. You visit the jail once, on an errand, nothing more. It's smaller than you'd imagined. Cold, even with the fire. The prisoners who remain are quiet. You see Elizabeth Proctor still awaiting news of her fate. Her child will be born in this room, in this winter. You try to speak to her, to say something kind. But there are no words. What could be said? That it will be over soon? That things will be better? You leave without speaking. The village begins to mark its grief in strange ways. A family plants winter rye over a grave, hoping for a strong spring. A group of women gathers quietly to pray, not for deliverance, but for memory. Someone leaves dried lavender at the foot of a tree. These are not rituals of religion. They are rituals of survival. You hear that Ann Putnam Jr. has fallen ill. Not visibly, no fever, no wound. But something has changed in her. Her eyes look older than her years. She no longer speaks of witches. She no longer cries out in pain. She's quiet now, observant, and when people ask her what she sees, she shakes her head. No spirits, no dark figures, nothing. Years later, she will write a public confession. She will say that she was deceived, that she truly believed at the time, that she now regrets the name she gave. But for now, in this winter, she only sits beside the fire and watches the flames, saying nothing. One morning, the first thaw begins. Ice drips from the roof in slow, careful drops. The earth softens, the paths reappear, the snow begins to rot away at the edges, and with it, the fear begins to drain from the village, not gone, not forgotten, but diminished. You look out across the fields and see the places where the carts once rolled, where the nooses once swayed, where the accusations once hung in the air like smoke, and it is quieter now. The echo remains, but it is fading. It has not ended, but it is ending. The snow vanishes slowly, leaving the ground soaked and spongy beneath your boots. The thaw does not bring joy, only exposure. Mud covers the roads where silence once reigned. Pools gather in the ruts made by the wheels of prison carts, and the fields, once frozen in stillness, now reveal everything they held beneath the frost. Snapped tools, trampled herbs, footprints that lead nowhere. Spring has not truly arrived yet, but it is coming. You can smell it in the soft rot of thawing earth, in the moss darkening on the fences, in the smoke curling slower from the chimneys. Life must go on, and it does, in small, uneasy ways. The new court, the Superior Court of Judicature, begins its sessions in January with a new tone, a new set of eyes, and new instructions. Spectral evidence is no longer allowed. Accusations without proof, dreams without witnesses, pain without cause, all of it now dismissed. One by one, the accused are tried again. Many are acquitted. The court is not merciful so much as wary. The colony's reputation has been frayed, and what happened in Salem is now whispered about far beyond its borders. There is pressure from Boston, from England. Even the ministers speak more carefully now. What was once sacred certainty is now seen as dangerous conviction. Some still linger in jail, not for guilt, but for debt. The prison charges for food, for chains, even for straw to sleep on. Those who have nothing remain behind, weeks and months after being declared innocent, until someone can pay. You hear of a woman, Anne Foster, who dies in her cell before she can be released. No trial, no sentence, no final words, just cold and silence, and a name that will take years to be cleared. Elizabeth Proctor survives the winter. She gives birth in her cell, a boy. She names him after his father. You don't see her, but you hear that when she's finally released in May, she walks with her head lowered, shawl tight around her, voice quiet but steady. She leaves Salem, never returns. Some try to act as if nothing has happened. They go back to farming, to trading, to repairing fences and tending chickens. They smile in the market, make polite conversation, kneel in church. But it does not feel the same. You see it in the way people hesitate before speaking, the way eyes linger too long, the way laughter dies quickly. No one says what they're thinking, who accused whom, who confessed, who stood silent while the noose was tied. Those who made accusations, some for gain, some for fear, some for belief, are not punished. No law was broken, but their reputations shift like loose bricks. Neighbours no longer ask for help, doors no longer open to them so freely. The girls are no longer called afflicted. They are called nothing. They become young women. They marry or move or simply fade. One afternoon you see the widow of John Willard tending a narrow patch of beans outside her door. She does not look up when you pass. Her husband was hanged in August. He had been a constable once, responsible for bringing in the accused. When he questioned the trials, when he hesitated, he was named. And now she weeds the same soil where he once stood. Reverend Parris clings to his pulpit, but his voice grows thinner by the week. More leave the church than attend. Petitions circulate for his removal. He delivers long, bitter sermons about forgiveness, but no one asks him for it. Eventually the pressure becomes too great. He's offered a payment to resign and leave Salem. He does, quietly, without fanfare, without confession. The town chooses a new minister, a gentler man, more soft-spoken. He says little about the trials. He prays for unity, for healing. But you wonder what he truly thinks when he stands in the pulpit where Paris once cried out for witches and called them by name. By summer, the fields are growing again, rye and squash, turnips. The land has not forgotten how to provide, though it gives its gifts cautiously now. You see children chasing chickens again, dogs barking at nothing, someone laughing at a joke in the tavern. But it all feels borrowed, like a tune played in the wrong key. And then, a year to the day from the first hanging, someone places a stone on the bare ground of Gallows Hill. A small one. No words, just a mark. By the week's end there are more. A line of them, crooked and scattered, laid by hands that do not speak aloud what they remember. You stand there one evening just as dusk folds across the town and count them. 19, one for each hanged. There is no stone for Giles Corey, only the earth, undisturbed and heavy. History doesn't stop. It never will. But you understand now that it doesn't move cleanly either. It loops, it stumbles, it forgets what it once shouted. And people, good people, frightened people, ordinary people, will always be capable of what happened here. The trials are over, the courts are closed, the nooses put away. But something lingers. Not the devil, not witchcraft. Something quieter. Doubt, shame, memory. And somewhere beneath it all, beneath the fields and the stones and the footsteps of returning life, lies the truth. What was done here cannot be undone, only remembered. 1693 begins without fanfare. No feast, no gathering, no prayers of gratitude, just cold ground, pale skies, and the slow, steady resumption of labour. The winter has passed, but it did not cleanse. The air is clearer, yes, but not lighter. It feels like stepping out of a smoke-filled house, only to find that the smoke is in your clothes, in your hair, in your breath. You cannot separate yourself from it. The Superior Court of Judicature reconvenes in January to try the remaining cases, but its work is brief. Most of the accused are found not guilty. Some are discharged for lack of evidence before the trials even begin. The court, cautious now, treads carefully through each testimony. There are no more fits, no more fainting girls, no more invisible wounds or spirits pinching in the night. The fever has passed. Only the mess remains. The prisoners, when released, don't return to celebration. They return to dust-filled homes, unpaid debts, crops lost in their absence. Some find that others have taken over their farms. Some return to empty rooms where children have been sent to distant relatives or neighbours. Others find no home at all. The colony offers them nothing. No apology, no restitution. Not yet. That will come much later, and only after many plead for it. Sarah Good's surviving daughter Dorcas, now 5 years old, does not speak. Not to anyone. She was jailed for months, accused and confined, forgotten in the chaos. Some say she still mimics the sound of chains with her hands. Some say she wakes screaming, but you don't see her. You only hear these things, and you wonder if they're true, or if this is just what people do to stories once they've finished with the facts. They dress them up in grief to make them fit the silence better. The village doesn't talk about the trials, not openly, but the past clings to everything. A man coughs in church and a few turn sharply, then soften their gaze. Someone drops a plate and no one speaks for a moment. These are not accusations, just old nerves firing off, phantom pains from a wound no one can see. More people begin to leave, those who confessed, especially. Some have been allowed to live because of those confessions, but survival has a cost. Their words were the kindling, their names, offered to escape the gallows, lit fires that burned through entire families. Mercy Lewis is gone. No one says where. Abigail Williams, too, vanished. Their stories end without endings, the pages torn from the book. Anne Putnam remains, and her silence deepens. You see her once outside her home, helping her mother fold linens. She moves slowly, like her limbs remember too much. You want to say something to her. You don't know what. You do not speak. And then, as if history had not been burned into every corner of the village, it begins again, life, cautiously, haltingly. A wedding is held in May, modest, quiet. A boy and a girl, too young to have been truly part of the terror, join hands in front of the church and say their vows. You stand among the small crowd and watch. You look around and see the gap where certain neighbours would have stood. You see the eyes of the others fixed on the ground, unable to celebrate. And yet the couple smiles. They laugh. And for a moment, just a flicker, it feels like the village might begin to breathe again. Then, Governor Phipps writes a letter. In it, he declares that he regrets the actions taken under his authority, that the court was misled, that the evidence was unreliable. He does not say the word innocent. He does not say murdered. But the tone has changed. He has felt the pressure from Boston, from London, from within his own conscience. He blames the judges, the ministers, the culture of fear. But the letter itself is a sign. They all know. They may not say it, but they know. Months pass. Crops are planted again. Wood is chopped. Children are born. But Gallows Hill still looms beyond the ridge, untouched, unmarked. No one speaks of building a monument. The names of the dead are not carved in stone. The pain is still too recent, and too many hands bear the ink and rope and silence that made it happen. And then there is one more quiet exit. Judge Stoughton. He does not resign. He simply withdraws from the trials, returns to other duties, never offers apology. In the years to come, he will be promoted, honoured, remembered by the courts as a man of law. But you will remember something else, that he allowed the hangings to continue, even when the ground had already grown thick with blood. As the year ends, you realise that Salem has not healed. It has only hardened. Like a scar over a wound too deep to close cleanly. It will take years, generations even, before the shame is fully spoken aloud, before the names are cleared, before the children of the hanged can walk freely without their shadows curling behind them. But for now, the fields grow again, the bread rises in the hearth, the Sabbath prayers are spoken once more, if more softly, and the dead, those 19 and the one crushed, remain beneath the silence, beneath the stones that strangers left without words. The village endures, because it must, because forgetting is easier than remembering, because the fire is out, and no one dare strike a flint again. But you still remember. By the time the trees turn gold again, the village no longer flinches at every shadow. There are children laughing in the fields, and smoke rises from chimneys that had gone cold during the worst months. You can buy eggs again, borrow salt, nod to your neighbours in the road without dread curling in your stomach. But these are not signs of healing. They are signs of necessity. Life presses forward, indifferent to grief, and people, like the soil, yield even when they're not ready. The names of the dead are not spoken in church, not even once, not during the weekly prayers, not in the moments of silence. You've noticed how carefully people step around those memories, like they're walking across cracked ice. The dead are not forgotten, they are remembered around, avoided, not denied. You hear whispers of one man, Samuel Nurse, the son of Rebecca, petitioning for justice. He wants his mother's name cleared. He wants it written plainly, publicly, that she was innocent. But the court moves slowly. There is reluctance, not because there is doubt, but because the truth, once spoken, demands acknowledgement of guilt. And no one wants to be the first to say what they allowed to happen. In Boston, ministers preach caution now. They write sermons that speak against excess zeal, against trusting dreams, against fear disguised as faith. But none of them name Salem, not directly. It's treated like a sickness that passed through. No one's fault, only a sad mystery. You wonder what's worse, that they will forget, or that they already pretend they have. You visit what remains of the Nurse homestead one afternoon, walking the long path through the trees. The house still stands, weathered but intact. The family continues to tend the land, but there is a hush to the place. When you pass near the well, you see one of the grandsons, perhaps 10 years old, carving something into a piece of bark. He doesn't speak, but he watches you with wary eyes. You don't ask what he knows. You don't ask what his mother told him about gallows, ropes, or confession. Some of the accused who are freed begin to speak, not in public, but in doorways, over stew pots, by the hearth after long silences. They talk about the jail, the hunger, the illness, the filth, about the interrogations, the pressure to name names. They talk about the strange mix of fear and pity in the eyes of their accusers, as if even those who pointed fingers knew, somewhere deep down, that the devil had never really come to Salem. Others never speak at all, not because they don't remember, but because they do. One Sunday, during a long sermon, you noticed that the new minister, Joseph Green, reads from the Gospel of Luke. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. His voice is calm, steady. His tone is not dramatic. But the pause after those words stretches long, too long. You realise he's waiting. Not for a response, but for what doesn't come. There is no acknowledgement, no soft Amen, just the crackle of the fire and a church full of people holding their breath. Later that year, the colony issues a formal proclamation, a day of fasting and soul-searching to reflect on what was done. The court does not say the trials were wrong, not quite, but it suggests that mistakes were made, that prayers are needed. You hear some scoff, others weep, but most just go through the motions. The fast is observed. The bell tolls. The village gathers in the meeting house again, and nothing changes. You think of Giles Corey sometimes, not his death, not the stones or the silence, but his decision. How he refused to play the game. How he knew that some things, once spoken, could not be unsaid. His choice was terrible, but it was clear. And there's a strange kind of peace in that, as if, in a world clouded by confusion and terror, he alone could see his way through the fog. The years begin to pull away from the events. You count them silently. 1 year since the hangings. 2, 3. Children are born who never heard the cries. Wheat grows again on land once walked by those condemned. The hill where the gallows stood is no longer visited. The stones that once marked the deaths are scattered, grown over, swallowed back by earth. And yet for some, the timeline does not matter. For those who lived through it, those who named names, those who carried bodies, those who watched family dragged away, it is not history. It is still happening, just in quieter rooms, in dreams, in sudden absences from conversation. A letter arrives from Boston in late 1696. You don't read it yourself, but the content spread quickly. Samuel Sewell, one of the judges, has issued a personal apology. He has stood in the South Church in front of the congregation and confessed his error. He wore sackcloth. He wept. He called on God for mercy. It is the first time someone with power has said the word wrong. Some call it brave. Others say it is too late. But it is something. You go to bed that night and find your sleep uneasy. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything that was never said. You dream of the voices of the accused, not screaming, not crying, but speaking in the calm, flat tones of those who know that the world has turned against them. You hear them clearly. One says, ask them if they remember. Another, ask if they still believe. But you do not ask, because no one answers. And the silence in Salem has always spoken loudest. Spring of 1697 brings no calamity, no trial, no gallows. The fields are green again. Bees return to the blossoms. The village moves through its days like a person who has survived an illness, walking, speaking, working, but never quite as before. Something in the bones is changed. And then, on a Sabbath morning in August, something unthinkable happens. Anne Putnam stands in front of the congregation. You hear the news before you see it. People whisper about it in the road, in hushed voices, as if speaking her name might summon the old fear again. They say she asked the new minister, Joseph Green, for permission, that she had written it down because her voice trembled too much to speak freely, that she had wept while practicing. And then, during the service, before the final hymn, she rises from her bench and steps forward, parchment in hand. She's 19 now, pale, solemn, and tightly drawn. No longer a child, but not yet old. You watch from your seat as she faces the room that once listened to her every word with open mouths and frozen hearts. She begins softly, a quiet breath, then the beginning. I desire to be humbled before God. You strain to hear, leaning forward. Around you, no one stirs. Not a cough, not a murmur. She continues. For that sad and humbling providence that befell my father's family in the year about 92, that I, then being in my childhood, should, by such a providence of God, be made an instrument for the accusing of several persons of a grievous crime, whereby their lives were taken away from them. The room does not move. You feel the press of her words like stones dropped into water, slow, heavy, rippling through the silence. She names them: Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, John Proctor, George Burroughs. One by one the names return, spoken not in fury now, but in mourning. Though what was said or done by me and was not intended in malice, yet it was a great delusion of Satan, and I desire to lie in the dust and earnestly beg forgiveness of God. You realize your hands are shaking. She begs forgiveness. From God, from the church, from the families she helped destroy. Her face is still, and her voice, though fragile, does not break. She does not ask to be absolved. She only asks to be heard. You look around. Some weep quietly. Others stare forward, blankly. One woman grips the bench so tightly her knuckles are white. When Anne finishes, she bows her head and steps back. She does not wait for a response. She sits, and the room remains still for a long moment before Minister Green softly begins the final hymn. It is a moment that does not erase anything, but it shifts something. Not enough, but something. You leave the church in silence. Outside, the wind is warm and the sun filters through the trees in soft beams. You hear the buzz of bees again, and the creak of a cart in the distance. The following weeks are quieter than before, a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of shame or fear, but the kind that comes after something hard has been spoken aloud, the kind that makes space, finally, for grief. Some reject Anne's confession. They say it was weakness, or manipulation, or too late to matter. Others say she was used then, and she's being used now. But some, those who lost everything, say nothing at all. They do not forgive, they do not accuse, they listen, and then they continue their lives. But you remember her standing there, small and still and trembling, naming the dead. Not every name, of course. So many were lost to time, confusion, or silence. But enough to feel the weight of it. The colony issues another proclamation the same year, a day of fasting and repentance for the late tragedy. It is the second time such a day is declared, but this one feels different. Not because it comes from the government, but because the people themselves now know what it means. You mark the day as you were told. You do not eat, you do not speak. You walk along the edges of the village and find yourself on the path toward Gallows Hill. It has grown over now. Wild grass, brambles, a few stones half sunk into the earth. There is no marker, nothing carved. But you stand there for a long time, watching the shadows shift as the sun tilts westward. There are no answers here, no justice that could ever balance what was taken. But maybe, just maybe, this is where the truth can begin to settle. Not as punishment, not even as atonement, but as memory. Honest, unflinching memory. Because there are some things a village must never forget. By the end of the decade, Salem is no longer the same Salem. The name is still spoken, of course. It still appears in letters, in church rosters, in grain ledgers. But something beneath the word has shifted, quietly, and not entirely spoken of. Some families have changed their names, moved a few miles east or west, left the memory to settle in abandoned fields. Others remain, but they walk the streets as if constantly searching the eyes of their neighbours, wondering who remembers and what. you begin to notice another silence taking root. Not the heavy, dreadful hush of 1692, but a quieter, older one. The silence of those who survived by naming others, the confessors. Their stories are rarely told, their names are recorded, but what happened after their confessions is often missing. No one asks what it felt like to survive that way, to walk back into the world with your name intact but your soul wounded. And yet, they are there, in the pews, at the wells, in the fields. They are the ones who looked at a noose and spoke a name instead. You pass by Deliverance Hobbs once near the edge of town. She's older now, shoulders bent, eyes on the ground. No one speaks to her directly, but they make room. You wonder if she remembers every syllable she said under pressure, every glance at the magistrate, if she remembers the pause before she gave up the names, if she knew then what it would mean. Samuel Wardwell confessed, recanted, and was hanged. His children lived. His widow lived. But you've heard whispers that in the years after none of the Wardwell children spoke much. They were often seen near the church, watching services but not entering, as if God had been paused in their family, frozen just beyond reach. Mary Warren, the servant in the Proctor house, was accused and then joined the accusers. She faltered, shifted back and forth, spoke of spectral attacks, then denied them. Her name drifts through the records like a leaf blown on the wind. After the trials, she vanishes from most accounts. You wonder where she went, what name she used afterward, whether her nights were quiet. Tituba, the enslaved woman at the centre of it all, remains the mystery no one wishes to solve. She confessed early, and in doing so shaped the trials before they took full root. Her stories of dark dogs and witches flying on poles made the magistrates lean forward with interest, not fear. Her words entertained them. They called her testimony strange, wild, even colourful. But then they forgot her, left her in jail. No one paid the fee to release her until a stranger came forward, bought her freedom, and took her away. Her name passes through the town now like a ghost. She's a question no one wants to answer. Confession was a choice, yes, but also a trap. Some believed it would save them, and in some cases it did. But it also marked them. You watch them from a distance now, the few who remain. Not excluded, not hunted, but not welcomed either. Their survival cost them a certain place in the world. They walk beside it, not within it. And then there are those who refused to confess and lived. Some, like Elizabeth Proctor, were spared by circumstance. Her pregnancy delayed her execution, but she returned to a house missing its foundation. John gone. Children half grown. The court had taken not just her name, but her years. She petitioned to get her husband's estate restored, and she won. But land is not justice. Bread does not replace a voice, and her silence became legendary. You think of all those who said nothing, even at the end. Of Martha Corey's calm denial. Of Rebecca Nurse's quiet dignity. Of George Burroughs reciting the Lord's Prayer beneath the hanging tree. You wonder whether their courage came from faith, from stubbornness, or from sheer exhaustion. Whether they looked into the eyes of the crowd and saw something worth defying, or whether they simply refused to let the lie shape them, even if it ended them. No one builds a monument to these choices. There are no plaques for refusal, no scriptures carved for silence. But the weight of those decisions hangs in the air of the village, in the tone of the sermons, in the way people pause before saying certain names. In later years, the General Court begins to reverse the convictions, piecemeal, slowly, cautiously. Some families petition, some do not. Some names are cleared, others are forgotten. The process is legal, cold, clerical. A signature here, a seal there. Nothing resembling mourning, nothing like healing. You see an older woman one day, perhaps in her 70s, sitting by the river. She holds something in her lap, a piece of cloth. She runs her hand along the hem as if remembering who stitched it. You sit nearby, not speaking, just listening to the water move. And then she says, almost to herself, they wanted names, not truth. She doesn't say more, and you don't ask, because you know, this isn't just about gallows or trials or ghosts. It's about what people do when fear outweighs reason, when power rewards those who point fingers, when silence is mistaken for guilt, and truth is buried beneath survival. Salem is quieter now, but in the quiet the memory echoes, and you begin to understand that some of the loudest sounds in history come not from shouts or screams, but from the things people choose not to say. There is a house just outside the village, not grand, not ruinous, low-roofed and timbered, with leaded glass windows that blink dimly in the sun. It leans slightly eastward, weathered by wind and years. The lane that leads to it curves gently past a slope of dry grass and a stand of birch trees. It is easy to miss if you're not looking for it, but you know it well. Everyone in Salem does. It was the home of Judge Jonathan Corwin. He lived here through the entire year of the trials, sat on the court, listened, questioned, approved warrants, signed death, and when the tide began to turn, when doubt crept like ivy up the walls of reason, he remained, silent, unrepentant, a man of law, but not of apology. He died in 1718, an old man seated in that same house, in the same chair where he once listened to accusations of flying women and biting spirits. No formal regret ever left his mouth. The house still stands. You visit it once, perhaps not meaning to. The door is closed, the shutters drawn, but the air around it holds something close and breathless, like the air before a storm that never comes. The floorboards beneath your steps sigh faintly. The light inside is sparse, filtered through old glass and thick curtains. There are no cries here, no ropes, no crowds. But there is a heaviness, the kind that sinks into the walls after too many nights of ink and whispers. You pause before the hearth. The stones are blackened with age. Above it hangs a portrait, faded, cracked. A man in a curled wig, eyes cold and mouth pressed thin. You do not need to ask. You know it is him. This is a house where judgments were digested, where the accused were read over supper, where guilt and innocence were debated beside warm bread and wine. A place where a man laid his pen beside a candle and slept soundly, knowing that by dawn someone else would be hanged. You walk the narrow corridor and pass rooms that feel occupied, though they are not. A chair slightly turned, a drape gently stirring, dust in the shape of books no longer there. There's a room, upstairs, second from the right, where the light always falls a strange way in the morning. Some say it's nothing, a trick of the glass, but others whisper that when you stand in that room alone you feel eyes on your back, watching, waiting. Not the spirits of the dead, not exactly, but the gaze of history itself, because this house, more than any place in Salem, has never forgotten. It was not burned, not abandoned, it was preserved, and in that preservation is something unnerving, not reverence, not memory, but pride. Years later, descendants would argue that Judge Corwin only did what was required of him, that he followed the law, that he believed what the girls said, that he was not cruel, only dutiful. You have heard this argument many times. You have nodded politely, then walked away, because belief is not innocence, and law is not justice. And that house, the Corwin house, stands as a monument not to righteousness, but to something far more complicated. The kind of quiet, bureaucratic terror that comes not from passion or fury, but from calm deliberation, from signatures, from sealed orders. The gallows were built by fear, but the trials, the machinery of accusation, the grind of evidence and testimony, the cold ink of condemnation, were constructed here, in houses like this, by men in wigs and waistcoats who kissed their children goodnight and rose in the morning to end lives with ink. In the years that follow, the house is passed down. No one changes it much. A coat of paint, a repair to the beams, but the heart of it stays. You can feel it. The way a building inhales memory and breathes it back out. It becomes known as the Witch House, not because witches lived there, but because power did. And if you close your eyes in that house, even for a moment, you can hear the rustle of parchment, the quill scratching decisions that cannot be undone, the soft click of a latch locking behind someone who has just signed a name. You leave the house in silence, walk back through the birch trees, listen to the birdsong that somehow seems muffled, distant. You know that there are places where tragedy screams, where ruins mark the spot of collapse, but this house does not scream, it whispers, and those whispers, steady, composed, relentless, tell the story of Salem not through the cries of the hanged, but through the rooms that held the men who let it happen. By the early summer of 1692, the witch trials were no longer just a Salem matter. They had spilled beyond the wooden fences and muddy lanes of the village, reaching into the wider region like smoke seeping through a door. The panic had legs now. It walked east to Boston, west to Andover, and north into the wilderness towns that lay on the edge of the known world. Fear, once contained, had learned to travel. It began gradually, first with whispers. A neighbour in Ipswich speaks of dreams. A child in Gloucester as fits. A servant in Topsfield sees strange shapes by the fire. You hear it when you travel, stopping at inns or crossing through villages on your way to gather grain or goods. Always the same shape. Someone afflicted, someone accused, someone arrested. The names come faster now. The constables no longer walk, they ride. The warrants arrive without explanation. One day, you pass a group of travellers on the road between Salem and Andover. Among them is a young woman in plain dress, hands bound in front of her, her face streaked with dust and tears. Her mother walks behind her, head low, lips moving in prayer. A man with a musket rides at the rear. You don't know the woman. You don't know what she was accused of, but you know where they're headed, and you know what likely awaits. Andover, until now peaceful, orderly, is overtaken by the madness. In July, the town receives its first wave of accusations. Before long, the people of Andover have the highest number of accused witches in all of Massachusetts. Entire families are arrested. Husbands, wives, daughters, names written down and read aloud like curses. You hear about the touch test, used here as well as in Salem. An afflicted person writhing in pain is brought to the accused. If the accused lays hands on the afflicted and the fit stops, it's taken as proof of guilt. You think about that. You think about the trembling hand of a mother touching her own child, desperate to comfort, only to find herself condemned by the very act. A mother's touch, now used against her. In Andover, suspicion turns inward. One woman, Mary Osgood, confesses to flying through the air with a host of other witches. She describes meetings with the devil in shadowed woods, speaking in an unnatural tongue. But years later, when the hysteria has cooled, she will say the confession was a lie, forced by threats and relentless questioning. At the time, though, it is enough. A confession is worth its weight in chains. You remember how quickly the logic turns. First, only the odd are accused, the poor, the defiant, the foreign. Then the upstanding are called, the godly, the respected. Then, even the accusers themselves fall under suspicion. No one is immune, because there are no rules, only momentum. You see the terror settle in people's posture. They walk differently, speak more cautiously, afraid not just of being accused, but of saying something that might be remembered, twisted, brought back later as proof of allegiance to the devil. Children are no longer innocent. Some testify against their own parents, and the courts believe them. The afflicted girls of Salem, whose fits had once drawn curiosity, now wield power like a torch. Abigail Williams is still among them, her voice now carrying further than ever. Mercy Lewis, Ann Putnam, Elizabeth Hubbard. Wherever they point, people fall. Their testimonies have become performance, vivid, fevered, filled with screams and visions. You begin to wonder whether they believe it themselves, or whether they've simply learned that belief and influence are now the same thing. At one trial you hear that a girl collapsed in court when the accused entered. The judges saw it as proof. When the accused approached her and she calmed, that was proof too. Everything confirms guilt. Nothing exonerates. Logic has no hold in a world where fear decides the outcome before the trial begins. There is a word people begin to avoid. Bewitched. It feels different now. Not like a tale from the fire or a scripture warning, but a curse one could actually catch. Like smoke in the lungs or poison in a well. You speak with a man in Amesbury who tells you plainly, it moves like a sickness. And he is right. The trials are no longer a judicial process. They are a plague. They feed on suspicion, on silence, on the very human need to explain suffering. If your cow dies, perhaps a witch did it. If your child falls ill, perhaps your neighbour's wife gave them the evil eye. If your dreams are troubled, perhaps the woman who looked at you strangely in church is not what she seems. The judges do not stop it. They do not question the mechanism of it. They only record, interrogate, sentence. At the head of it all is William Stoughton, Lieutenant Governor and Chief Magistrate. He believes fully, unquestionably. He sees doubt as weakness, skepticism as a tool of the devil. Under his hand, confessions are rewarded, denials punished. There is no mercy, only verdicts. You begin to realize something terrible, that the court is no longer trying to discover the truth. It believes it already knows. The process is not investigation, it is confirmation. By the end of August, the jails are full beyond capacity. Chains rattle day and night. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp straw, human fear. Some prisoners are held in irons for weeks. One woman gives birth in prison. Her child dies within days, and yet still more are accused. Still more are arrested. Still the trials continue. You begin to wonder if it will ever stop, if there is an end to something that feeds on itself, if a fire will burn out once it starts devouring the very hands that lit it. In the corners of the colony, where people speak less and pray more, there are murmurs of innocence, of injustice, of something gone wrong. But for now the storm still moves forward, and those who stand in its path, truthful or guilty, silent or loud, are swept away just the same. You never forget the way the sky looked on a hanging day. Not stormy, not dark, just blank. Pale as wool, neither sun nor shadow, just that grey, weightless silence that seems to wrap the world in pause. That's what you remember first. Then the dust, stirred by horses and feet. Then the sound, low murmurs, slow footsteps, the creak of wood. By mid-August of 1692, executions in Salem had become almost ritual, each one marked by procession and gathering. Not celebratory, not quite. Not like the crowds that gather for market days or harvest fairs. These crowds were subdued, still, careful with their words. Not because of sorrow, though some were sad, but because of uncertainty. You could come to see a hanging and be accused by the next morning. Better to be quiet, better to blend in. Gallows Hill stood just outside the village. Not a towering rise, but steep enough to require effort. It was bare then, no fence, no marker. Only a low slope of scrub grass and the trees that curled away from the crown as if they too feared the scaffold. There was no gallows at first, no permanent structure. The first few were hanged from a sturdy tree, its limbs thick and angled. Later a wooden frame was built, a beam and post, rough-hewn and dark with pitch. No one wanted to say who built it, but someone did. Someone hammered and lifted and fixed the noose. The names still ring in your ears. Bridget Bishop was first, hanged on June 10th. She had been tried alone, her guilt predetermined in the eyes of many. A woman known for wearing bright clothes, for running a tavern, for speaking boldly, for being, in a word, inconvenient. You think of her face, not fearful, but tight. Her mouth held shut against the weight of injustice. She wore a black hood. Her hands were bound in front of her. When the cart was pulled away and her body dropped, a gasp rose from the crowd. Not horror exactly, more like the breath of a truth finally taking shape. Yes, it could happen. And yes, it had. Then came July. 5 more were hanged. Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds. Sarah Good spoke to the very end, cursed the judges, cursed the clergy, cursed those who condemned her. Her final words were sharp as bone. You are a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard. If you take my life, God will give you blood to drink. You wonder if anyone else heard it, if it made them hesitate. Rebecca Nurse died quietly, 61 years old, a member of the church, mother to many. Her execution sent ripples through the colony, because if she could be hanged, no one was safe. Her family buried her in secret beneath moonlight, carrying her body away from the hill without permission. You heard someone say her grave still lies beneath a tree near the old nurse homestead, marked only by silence. August brought 5 more deaths: George Burroughs, Martha Carrier, John Willard, George Jacobs Sr., and John Proctor. Burroughs had once been a minister in Salem, a man of education and scripture. On the scaffold he shocked the crowd by reciting the Lord's Prayer clearly and without error, a thing witches were said to be incapable of doing. For a moment the people wavered. You could feel it, a hum, a crack in the storm, but it was too late. Cotton Mather, watching from horseback, reminded them that the devil was a deceiver. The rope was tightened, and Burroughs dropped. His body lay in the dust for hours. John Proctor's death struck deeply. He had spoken out against the trials, criticised the court, questioned the girls. He was not meek. He did not ask forgiveness. His execution was not just the death of a man, but the silencing of opposition. His wife, Elizabeth, had been sentenced too, but spared because she was pregnant. She watched her husband die from a prison cell, hands curled around her stomach. You hear of how the bodies were not buried in consecrated ground. Witches had no place in the churchyard. Instead, they were buried near the base of the hill in shallow graves, often without markers. Some families came secretly at night to reclaim their dead. Others left them to time. By September, the hill had become a place no one looked at directly. People passed it, yes. The cows grazed nearby. Children still played on the lower slopes. But the top, the place where the rope swung, was avoided. There was a quiet understanding. Some things were better left unspoken, even as they were still happening. Each execution was meant to be final, to end the threat. But each one seemed to feed the panic further. Every hanging made the next more inevitable. It was as if the scaffold demanded blood to justify its existence. You see it now, not just as punishment, but as spectacle, a performance of power, a symbol. The colony needed order, and the noose gave it shape. Guilt was less important than control. Fear had become law, and yet cracks were forming. A minister from Boston, Increase Mather, had begun to question the trials, quietly at first, then more openly. It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape, he said, than that one innocent person should be condemned. His words rippled through the town like a slow wave, not loud enough to stop the hangings yet, but enough to make people start thinking. Still, on September 22nd, 8 more died. Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, Anne Pudiator, Margaret Scott, Wilmot Redd, Samuel Wardwell, Mary Parker. The hill grew crowded. The cart creaked more heavily. The ropes grew stained. The dust turned darker where the feet had dragged. And then, perhaps for the first time, you sensed that it might end. Not from justice, not from awakening, but from sheer exhaustion. There were fewer names left. The jails were overfull, the air had turned colder, the leaves began to fall. Even fear, it seems, has a season. But for now, the hill still waits, the beam still stands, and the noose, heavy and quiet, sways faintly in the wind. There had been whispers about him for months. Giles Corey, a farmer, a man in his early 80s, weathered and slow-moving, but hard as the soil he worked. Not well liked, but not hated either. Known for a temper, known for a quiet sort of suspicion that trailed him like a shadow. And when the accusations came, they didn't come for his wife first. They came for him. It wasn't unusual anymore. Husbands were accused after wives, children after parents, but Giles's case became something else entirely, something heavier. He did not flee, he did not speak out, he simply refused to plead. In the colonial courts, a person had to enter a plea, guilty or not guilty, before being tried. Without it, there could be no legal proceedings. And so, the punishment for silence was a practice older than the colonies themselves, brought from England, rare but remembered. Peine forte et dure, pressing. They called it that formally, but in Salem they said it more plainly. They said they crushed him with stones. You hear about it days after it happens, but the story unfolds slowly, as if no one wants to carry it all at once. It began in mid-September. Corey had been in jail since spring. His wife, Martha, was already condemned. He was brought from the prison to an open field near the jail where the ground was flat and dry. They laid him on his back, a board placed across his chest. Weights added, stone by stone. He never spoke. A sheriff named George Corwin supervised the punishment. You know his name. You've seen him often. Young, stern, sure of himself. The kind of man who carries authority not like a burden, but like a birthright. He ordered more stones. Still, Giles Corey refused to plead. Witnesses later said that with each stone the board would creak. The breath would press out of his body, but he never begged. Never confessed. He was asked repeatedly, "Will you enter a plea?" And every time his response was the same. More weight. Those were his only words. You hear them from a neighbour, then again from a merchant. By the week's end the phrase is everywhere, spoken quietly, in corners, in wonder, in horror, in something close to reverence. There's something about it, his resistance, not just physical, but spiritual. In a time when words were used as weapons, when the only power left to the accused was their confession or their silence, Giles Corey chose the one weapon left to him, and wielded it without speaking. It took 2 days. They say he died with his eyes open. He left no will. His land passed to his sons. Some said his refusal to plead was calculated. to prevent his estate from being seized by the Crown, as would have happened with a formal conviction. Perhaps. But even if that was part of it, the manner of his death was more than legal manoeuvring. It became legend. Not the kind sung about, but the kind carried in posture, in whispers. Something changed after that. The executions continued for a time. The court still moved forward, but there was a hesitation now. The weight of what had been done settled on people's shoulders, not just the literal stones, but the symbolic ones. Because Giles Corey didn't just die. He broke something open. He forced people to reckon with the machinery of the trials in a way they hadn't before. It wasn't the scream of a woman on the gallows, nor the crying of children in court. It was an old man lying in the dirt, unblinking, unmoving, unyielding. More weight. You walk past his farm one day, weeks later. The house is still. The fields are empty. There's a shovel leaning against the side of the barn, half covered in leaves. No one answers when you call out. But you know someone is there. His sons. Perhaps a cousin. Watching from the window. No one waves. You think about what it means to die like that. On your back. Under stone. With the eyes of a village upon you. You wonder what thoughts passed through his mind in those last moments. If he thought of his wife. Condemned. If he thought of the land. If he thought of nothing at all. Only the breath squeezed slowly from his lungs. The world narrowing to a single point of pressure. Some said he was mad. Others said he was brave. You're not sure it matters. What matters is that he said no. Not loudly, not violently, but absolutely. And in a time when silence could mean death, he made silence into a weapon. It echoes still. In the space between words, in the stillness of a room, in the heaviness of history. The morning after the last execution, the village feels emptied. Not in the way winter empties a road or Sunday stills the fields, but deeper, stranger, as if the air itself holds its breath. Gallows Hill is quiet now, the rope finally removed. The beam, left standing but no longer touched. People avoid the path that leads to it, and when they must pass by, they do so quickly, eyes averted. You find yourself walking through Salem, past the meeting house, past the jail, past the home of the Putnams and the parsonage where it all began. It's not any one place that feels different. It's all of them. The shadows have shifted. The spaces between buildings, the silence in the air, even the crows that pick at the bare fields. Everything seems to reflect a tension that can no longer be sustained. The court continues, at least on the surface. The trials haven't been officially halted. Accusations still arrive, but they feel different now. Less charged, more desperate. The girls are still testifying. Anne Putnam, Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott. But their claims are beginning to sound repetitive. The names they bring forward feel less convincing. There are fewer screams, fewer fits. The courtroom does not stir as it once did. And then, for the first time, a confession is refused. A woman named Dorcas Hoare, long imprisoned and sentenced to hang, is offered a final chance to save herself. She's asked to confess. She declines. She stands in court with her hair unbraided, a symbol of mourning and vulnerability, and says nothing. No cries of innocence, no pleas for mercy, just stillness. The court delays her execution. You begin to notice that people are speaking again, in corners, behind closed doors. Soft words, uncertain words, but words of doubt. The town that once shouted now murmurs. In early October, Reverend Increase Mather of Boston, father to Cotton, publishes a small book. In it he writes plainly, "It is better that 10 suspected witches should escape, than that one innocent person should be condemned." You hear it quoted in a sermon, then again in a tavern, then by a man on horseback heading west. The words spread like Thor. Suddenly it seems that others had been thinking it too, that things had gone too far, that something had been lost. Even the governor, William Phipps, who had once signed the commissions and warrants, begins to turn. His own wife's name is rumoured among the accused, and that, perhaps more than anything, makes the hysteria feel real to him. He orders a halt to the trials. The Court of Oyer and Terminer is dissolved. The name itself vanishes almost overnight. No farewell, no ceremony. Just an absence where once there had been judgment. In its place, a new court is formed. The Superior Court of Judicature. Its judges are instructed to ignore spectral evidence. No more dreams, no more ghostly shapes, no more invisible tormentors. Only tangible proof will be admitted, and without that, Without the visions and fits and shadows, there is little left. In January of 1693, the new court begins reviewing the remaining cases. Dozens remain imprisoned. Some have been there for over 8 months. Their hair has whitened, their skin bruised by cold and chains. They speak in hushed voices, but now, one by one, they are found not guilty. You remember the first time you hear it in court. A judge says the words and a gasp fills the room. Not loud, but long. Not guilty. And then another, and another. Pardons are issued. Not to all. Not at once. But the tide is shifting. The afflicted girls, they are no longer listened to with such reverence. One breaks down during a hearing, weeping and incoherent. Another is said to have fled the village entirely. The crowd no longer leans forward when they speak. Now it draws back. Even Cotton Mather, so once certain in his zeal, begins to step back from the fire. He writes of caution, of moderation. He urges prayer instead of condemnation. His voice, once a bell-tolling judgment, now rings less clearly. You see families reunited, not joyfully, not fully. The prison has changed them. The grief has left marks. But there is relief. You see a man fall to his knees when his wife is freed, clutching her hand in both of his as if it might vanish again. But not all are released. Some remain behind bars. Some die before pardons arrive. Sarah Osborne perished months ago in jail. Anne Foster of Andover dies alone, still awaiting trial. And not all names are cleared. The state will take years, decades, to fully exonerate those condemned. For some, the shadow never lifts. The Court of Oyer and Terminer leaves behind no monument, no plaque, no official end. It simply stops. But the memory remains. In the silence that follows, people begin to look backward, to ask how it happened, how ordinary fear became lethal, how neighbours became executioners, and how so many could stay silent for so long. You think of Giles Corey again, his silence, his stones. You think of Rebecca Nurse, her simple prayers. You think of the long line of names stretching back to February. So many lives unravelled, so many words twisted into ropes. And now, in the clearing fog, you wonder what will come next, whether memory will be enough to keep it from happening again. You're not sure. But for now, the court is gone, and the rope hangs no more. The snow comes early that year, heavy dry flakes that sweep across the rooftops and gather in the corners of the meeting house yard, blanketing the bare trees that only weeks before had watched gallows rise and drop. Salem turns inward with the cold, doors stay closed longer, lanterns are lit earlier, the streets quiet even more. And beneath it all, there's the slow shift of awareness, unspoken, uneasy, like a river beginning to thaw under a crust of ice. No new arrests are made after the dissolution of the Court of Oyer and Terminer. Those who remain in jail, dozens of them, languish in small cold rooms, their chains rusting, their fingers cracked and bloodless. The jails were never meant to hold people this long, certainly not this many. The guards now speak with less conviction, more fatigue. One of them, a young man from Ipswich, resigns his post and returns to farming, unable to bear the sounds at night, the coughing, the soft prayers, the quiet sobs that come through the walls. In Boston and Andover, petitions begin to appear, carefully written documents signed by trembling hands, husbands pleading for wives, daughters begging for mothers, farmers who have lost their labour, children who have lost their caretakers. And while these petitions are still addressed to authority, there's something changed in the language. Less deference, more insistence, less trust, more demand. Governor Phipps, feeling the weight of the backlash, issues a general pardon in early 1693, not for all, but enough to shift the ground further. 70 of the remaining accused are released, not acquitted, no, that would take years, but released into the cold air of January with whatever health they still have. They return to homes overgrown with disrepair, to families thinner, poorer, but still waiting. You walk the road between Salem and Danvers, watching as one of the released women, Abigail Faulkner of Andover, limps past with her daughters. She had been pregnant in jail. Her child survived. Her hair is thinner now, and she does not speak unless spoken to. Her daughters, too, look aged in ways no child should. In Salem village, Reverend Parris feels the ground beneath him weakening. His sermons, once fiery and righteous, are met now with stony silence. Families begin to drift from the meeting house. Some no longer attend at all. One morning, a group of villagers refuses to sit in the pews. They stand at the rear wall through the entire service, their silence louder than any protest. He knows what they mean by it. And then, one by one, people begin to name their regrets. Not publicly, not yet, but privately, around hearths, behind church walls. A merchant confesses to a friend that he once exaggerated what he saw. A mother admits that she pressured her daughter into testifying. A magistrate's assistant resigns, citing a burden of conscience. These are small cracks, but they grow. In March, a woman named Mary Herrick claims to be afflicted by spirits. But when she accuses the very same girls who once made the accusations, the court listens with less interest. The power that once surged through the testimonies of the afflicted is draining away. The names of Abigail Williams and Mercy Lewis, once spoken in reverence or fear, are now met with bitterness. Abigail disappears from Salem entirely. Some say she went to Boston. Others whisper she died in the winter. No one seems certain. Ann Putnam remains. She walks the village in silence, avoiding the eyes of the mothers whose daughters did not return. She's 16 now. Her face no longer flushes with fevered drama. She keeps her eyes low, her steps careful. The world has grown quiet around her. You wonder if she knows what she has done, and yet no one truly knows how to begin the reckoning. There is no ceremony for undoing what was done, no rituals for recalling executions, no liturgy for mending trust, only the slow, halting work of survival. The families of the dead begin to gather, not all at once, not together, but in small moments. You hear of the Proctors, who plant winter rye in silence where John once turned the soil. You see Sarah Cloyce, sister of Rebecca Nurse, lighting a single candle in her kitchen each night, whispering the psalm her sister sang before her death. At the foot of Gallows Hill someone places a stone, then another, unmarked, then another. They begin to pile, not a monument, not yet, but something like memory, something like weight. Spring lies far ahead, but the wind smells of earth again, of thaw, of things buried deep beginning to stir. The village is quieter now, but it listens more closely. No one speaks of witches anymore, not because they've forgotten, but because remembering has become a different thing entirely. The snow lingers late into March, but it is thinner now, melting in streaks along rooftops and roads, bleeding into the soil with a slow, almost reluctant grace. The first buds do not yet show, but the air carries a softer edge, and you notice the birds returning, faint and infrequent in the trees behind the parsonage. The village holds its breath. Inside the meeting house the wood is cold. The benches are familiar, too familiar. You've sat here through the worst of it, through sermons that call down judgment, through trials whispered just beyond the walls. The pulpit rises above the room, but it does not command any more. Reverend Samuel Parris stands there still, but his words have grown thinner, his gaze more restless. He has not apologized, not truly. There was one sermon, not long after the court was dissolved, in which he spoke of errors in judgment, of sorrows shared by the flock. But his words circled guilt without ever naming it. He clung still to the notion that the devil had walked among them, that evil had merely been misread, misjudged, mishandled. His voice faltered when he said it, as though even he no longer fully believed it. You watch as more and more benches sit half empty each Sunday. The Putnams still attend, heads high, but others do not. The Nurse family does not come. The Porters are rarely seen. The Coreys, what remains of them, never returned. Even the young girls, the ones who once fell into fits and cried out names, avoid the front rows. Ann Putnam sits near the back, pressed between two of her cousins, eyes always lowered. Outside, the village has begun to repair itself, not visibly, not with hammers or saws, but in small, imperceptible ways. Two neighbours who had not spoken for months now exchange brief words over a fence line. A man returns a borrowed spade left behind during the summer's arrests. A child born while his mother was imprisoned is baptised quietly, with only a few witnesses. The pain is still there, but it is quieter now, and yet something has shifted in the wind. One Sunday, it is announced that Reverend Parris's contract is under review. The wording is formal, but the meaning is plain. A group of villagers has submitted a petition to the council in Boston requesting his removal. Their reasons are measured but clear: his failure to calm the hysteria, his part in the trials, the ongoing division under his leadership. He does not address it directly, Not at first. But there's a tightness to his voice in the following weeks. His sermons grow more urgent, more defensive. He quotes from Job, from Jeremiah. He speaks of betrayal, of burdens placed on the shepherd by a wayward flock. He does not name names, but his eyes scan the room with the weight of accusation. Still, the council delays. There are procedures, politics. It takes time. Meanwhile, a new preacher begins visiting from Boston, a young man named Joseph Green. He speaks gently, with an even tone, and he avoids the pulpit. Instead, he stands among the people, sometimes in the aisle, sometimes beside the hearth. He speaks not of damnation, but of healing, of responsibility, of memory. The meeting house is fuller when he speaks. Even the proctors attend once, quietly. They do not stay long. You notice that the older villagers, those who had lived through King Philip's War, who had survived famine and plague, seem changed in a different way, less surprised, as if they have seen, again, what people are capable of when they are afraid. The younger ones seem bewildered still. They grew up in a world where the devil was real, where witches could be named and hanged, and now they are being told that perhaps it wasn't so, that what they thought was truth was something else entirely. The ground beneath them is still soft. One evening, you walk past the jail again. The doors are open now, empty. The cells hold only straw and the ghosts of voices. A new sheriff patrols the town. George Corwin, once so central, has retreated. Some say he is sick. Others say he has withdrawn to his home on the harbour, seldom seen in public. The weight of names may have followed him there. In May, a woman who had lost 3 daughters during the trials places a cross in her garden. Simple, wooden, unmarked. She does not speak of it. But others begin to follow. Symbols appear, quiet, not public. Carved into trees, etched into stone. Not protest, not even remembrance, but something gentler, a recognition. You find yourself tracing the year backward, trying to mark where it began, when it might have turned. Was it the night the girls first screamed? Was it when the court was formed? When the first confession came? Or the first hanging? Or perhaps it was always there, waiting, beneath the surface. The meeting house grows colder as spring hesitates to arrive, but something else warms, faintly, uncertainly, in the space between the benches. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of truth, and that too has its weight. The days stretch longer now, and though the nights remain cold, the soil begins to yield again beneath your boots. Shoots of green press up through the thawed earth, and the sky over Salem turns a gentler blue. The rhythm of planting returns, cautious but determined, as families till land long neglected. Yet even as the outward signs of life re-emerge, something within the village remains muted, especially in the eyes of the young. You see Anne Putnam often. She walks alone now more than before, though sometimes her younger brothers trail behind her like shadows. She has grown since the first accusations, taller, paler, thinner. The flush of drama, once so vivid on her cheeks as she clutched at invisible wounds, has faded entirely. She keeps her hair tied back now, her face unreadable. She does not attend dances, not that there are many. She sits quietly at the back of the meeting house, eyes trained on the floor. She has said nothing, not in public, not even to the other girls. The bond they once shared has frayed, and though Mercy Lewis still visits her family, their conversations are clipped, infrequent. What was once a sisterhood forged in trembling ecstasy is now only a memory too fragile to name. Anne's parents remain stalwart. Thomas Putnam, though quieter than in previous months, still walks with his shoulders square and head high. He greets neighbours when required, avoids those he knows to resent him. His wife, Anne Senior, clings to the church more tightly than ever, her prayers louder, more desperate. But the villagers are not unkind to Anne herself. There is instead a kind of wary distance, sympathy laced with blame, grief wrapped in confusion. Children watch her. Adults avert their gaze. It's said that she has begun writing. Small notes, pages of script hidden beneath her mattress. No one has seen them, not truly, but a neighbour glimpsed her at dusk one evening, candle lit beside her, quill scratching across parchment. Perhaps she's preparing to speak. Perhaps not. Some things fester silently for years before they break open. You remember how she had once accused her own mother's midwife, how she screamed in the courtroom and claimed to see the woman's spirit strangling her in the pew. That woman died in jail, Mary Estie's sister. The accusation had come suddenly, violently, and then silence. What did Anne feel when the news came of the execution? What passed through her when she stood beside her parents at dinner that evening? She never spoke of it. Elsewhere, the town continues to breathe in and out with awkward rhythm. A few families leave entirely, selling their land at a loss and heading west toward less scrutinized villages. New ministers are considered, and Reverend Parris grows increasingly isolated. His sermons tighten, filled with more citations from Revelation, more warnings about wolves among sheep. Few listen closely anymore. Joseph Green, young and measured, remains nearby, visiting homes, offering gentle counsel. His presence does not ignite fear, it quiets it. You hear that Sarah Good's surviving daughter has been taken in by another family. She speaks little. She was barely 4 when her mother was hanged, but the villagers remember her clinging to her skirts, crying in the jail as her mother stood on the gallows. Someone tried to remove her that morning, but she would not let go. The new court in Boston, having cleared dozens of charges, slowly begins addressing reparations. Families petition for compensation, for land lost, for time in jail, for the wrongful deaths of their kin. Some receive small payments, others are denied. The process is long, tangled in politics and pride, but it marks a shift. The government now acknowledges that something went deeply wrong. Still, no apology comes from Paris, no admission from the court's justices. Judge Stoughton refuses to concede error. He maintains the court acted within the law. For him, and for others like him, it is easier to believe the devil tricked them all than to admit they were never in control to begin with. One afternoon you pass by the Nurse homestead. A stone wall surrounds the pasture, and beyond it 2 of Rebecca Nurse's sons work silently, mending a section near the edge of the woods. They do not speak as you pass. They haven't spoken much since the trial, but their hands work steadily, stacking stones with a patience born not from peace, but from something harder. Endurance, maybe, or grief given form. And always in the background the question, what of the girls? What of Anne Putnam? Did she believe what she saw? Did she believe at all? You wonder if she asks herself the same question in the still hours before dawn, when the house sleeps and only the wind moves the shutters. Does she remember the faces of those she named? Or does she remember only the feeling, the terrifying clarity of being believed, of having the eyes of the village turned toward her, hanging on her every word? Perhaps it is both. Perhaps that is the heaviest part. No public apology comes, not yet. But inside Anne, something is shifting, and Salem waits. By late spring, Salem breathes with unease wrapped in routine. Crops are sown again, paths once abandoned now trodden with cautious steps. But though the rhythms return, the hammering of repairs, the prayers before planting, the opening of shutters to let in the wind, there is a silence that won't lift from certain corners of the village. A silence rooted not in the absence of sound, but in the presence of memory. They are buried quietly, those who died in the jails. Not the executed. Their names were read aloud, their deaths public, drawn out, final. But the others, the ones who wasted away behind stone walls, starved and neglected, broken in spirit, those burials are smaller, colder, and often without markers. You hear of the service held for Lydia Dustin of Reading, a woman of nearly 80 who had been imprisoned for months without trial. Her family buried her beside a brook outside the village line, with no sermon and no songs. In Ipswich, another woman dies in the same cell where her daughter once lay shackled beside her. They were both accused. The daughter was released. The mother remained too long, and in Boston, Sarah Osborne, one of the first 3 accused, died before she could stand trial. Her name, though faded now in the public mind, lingers on certain lips, usually whispered. Her estate, small and dwindled, was taken by the Crown. Her name was not cleared. You find yourself walking paths you've walked before. Past the courthouse, its shutters closed now. Past the old jail, now used only for petty crimes. Past the burial hill where none of the hanged were granted rest. No stone, no grave, just wind and time. The bodies of the 19 executed during the frenzy were cut down and likely buried in shallow, secret places by their families in the night. Risking arrest, risking public wrath, they stole the bodies of the condemned to return them to the earth with dignity. Rebecca Nurse's sons are said to have done just that. You picture them in silence, cloaked in the dark, digging by lantern light under trees, placing their mother into the earth with hands that trembled but did not stop. No hymns, just soil and silence. And it is this, these small hidden burials, that begin to change the air. You notice that people speak now not of witchcraft, but of loss. A man whose wife was accused and released offers cider to a neighbour whose cousin was hanged. They do not speak of it directly, but the offering is received. A girl who once testified against her servant avoids her in the street. The servant says nothing, only continues with her bucket, her back straight. Among the girls there is no unity left. Mercy Lewis, once the fiercest voice in the courtroom, has gone to Boston. Some say she left under pressure. Others say she was sent by her guardians to distance her from the events. Elizabeth Hubbard is rarely seen. She walks with her aunt in the evening, eyes low. Mary Walcott still lives in the village, but the laughter that once followed her has dried up. Ann Putnam remains the quietest. She does not speak of the trials. But one morning you pass by the meeting house and see her there alone, kneeling near the doorway with her head bowed. Not in prayer, just stillness. Her hands rest in her lap. A breeze catches the edge of her dress and she does not move. You hear, through whispers and fragments, that she has begun visiting the homes of the families whose kin she named. No one answers the door at first. One woman stands behind a window unmoving as Anne waits outside. Another tells her to leave. But a third, an older woman whose husband died in prison, opens the door and simply says, "I know." Nothing more. Still, it is not enough. The fabric of Salem is frayed, not only by death, but by what was permitted to happen, by how easily fear took hold, how quickly neighbour turned on neighbour. The court may have dissolved, the jails may have emptied, but the accusation lives on in memory. What is said cannot be unsaid. What was believed cannot be unremembered. And yet, something curious begins. One family begins to mark their front gate with chalk, 2 lines, crossed, a quiet sign to others who have suffered. Then another family does the same. You begin to notice them, on fences, on stones, carved faintly into wood. No one explains them, but you understand. They are acknowledgements, quiet recognitions. The General Court in Boston begins compiling a record of those arrested and tried, a formal review. They do not yet call it an error, but they use phrases like irregular proceedings, evidentiary doubt, and unsubstantiated claims. Judge Sewall, one of the court's justices, privately expresses regret. His confession will come later, but even now he avoids the eyes of those who once begged him for clemency. The tide has turned, but the village is still learning how to live with what remains, and beneath the ground, unmarked, the bodies rest. They were never supposed to be mourned, but they are, quietly, relentlessly, by those who know the names. It is summer now. The light stays longer in the windows, stretching across the floorboards of Salem's houses in golden slats that flicker with dust. The wheat grows high in the fields, bees hum thickly around the clover, and yet the heat seems heavier than before, not with weather alone, but with the slow drag of things left unsaid. A village can resume its work, a meeting house can be filled again, but silence left too long begins to echo. And then, Ann Putnam speaks. You're not there the morning it happens. Few are. The moment does not come from the pulpit or in the square, but in a small room beside the nurse homestead, where Anne has asked to meet the family. She has sent word days earlier, not demanding, not pleading, just stating that she has something to say. Her father comes with her. Her mother stays behind. She stands in that doorway for a long time before stepping inside. Rebecca Nurse's eldest son sits across from her, arms folded across his chest. His sister, Rebecca's daughter, is beside him. The air is warm, close. No one moves for a long while, and then Anne begins to speak, not with trembling, not with ceremony, but slowly, and from something deeper than guilt. She says she was wrong. She says she thought she was right. She says that everything they were taught made it easy to believe that Satan moved among them, and that her fits, her visions, her certainty were not hers alone, but shaped by what she was told, what she was expected to feel, to see. And yet, she says, that does not excuse it. She names Rebecca Nurse. She says her name clearly, and then she says, "I murdered her with my words." No one speaks. Anne doesn't cry. Her voice doesn't rise. She does not ask to be forgiven. She only says that she carries it, and she will carry it for the rest of her life. Outside, the trees sway in the slow summer breeze. Inside, the Nurse family listens, unmoving. At some point, Anne's father puts a hand to her shoulder. She steps away from it. She's 17 now, and already her voice carries more weight than it did when she was 12, screaming and pointing and claiming to see the devil in the rafters. She does not speak in tongues now, she speaks plainly, and that somehow is heavier. News spreads, slowly but steadily. No one calls it a confession. Some say it was rehearsed, others say it's too late. But many, privately, are shaken. A few days later she visits another family. The wife of John Proctor, Elizabeth, agrees to meet her in the garden behind the house. They do not speak long. What passes between them is not shared, but Elizabeth is seen holding Anne's hand as she walks her to the gate. And then the town begins to change, just slightly. People talk more openly about what happened. Not always kindly, but honestly. The story begins to shift, from tales of witches and trials to the memories of grief, of hysteria, of the sharp edges of belief. Sermons begin to reference human failing, not just satanic deception. And slowly, a space opens in the narrative for responsibility. In Boston, Judge Sewall takes a more public step. One Sunday, standing before the congregation in South Church, he rises during the service and reads a statement. He admits his part in the court. He asks for God's pardon. He bows his head and does not speak for the rest of the day. His words spread throughout the province in printed form, shocking many. He is the first and only judge to do so. Salem does not cheer this. It does not celebrate. It does not forget, but it hears it. Reverend Parris, by contrast, remains defiant. He begins to preach more aggressively now, warning of divine punishment for those who turn away from the truth. His congregation dwindles. The council in Boston, under increasing pressure, finally votes to remove him from office. By the end of the year he leaves Salem, not in disgrace, but certainly not in triumph. We pass the meeting house again a week later. It is empty, sun streaming through the upper windows. The air smells of wood and age. In the dust near the pews you find a line of chalk left by a child's hand, faded almost to nothing. 2 lines, crossed. In its own way, the village has begun its reckoning. Not loud, not complete, but real. And Anne Putnam walks its roads quietly. Still too young to be called woman, but far older than her years. She does not speak often now, but when she does, people listen differently. The weight of confession, it seems, is not in the act of speaking. It is in carrying it forward. The summer days of 1693 drift onward with a kind of stillness that feels unnatural in Salem village, like the quiet after a long storm, when the wind no longer rattles the shutters and the ground lies flattened beneath the weight of what has passed. Yet the silence is not peace. It is not forgetting. It is the hush that settles when there are too many names to speak aloud, too many questions that no longer have answers, only consequences. The talk of witchcraft has nearly vanished. It slips behind curtains when visitors arrive and fades like smoke in conversation. People speak in terms like the Troubles, last year's affliction, or simply the time. But the words witch and devil are treated like lit embers, touched only by those who cannot let go. And there are still some who cannot. In the northern end of the village, one woman continues to insist that she hears the witches in her dreams. She's not a girl, but a widow, hardened by years and grief, and she's been repeating the same visions for months. Her neighbours nod politely but do not answer. No one moves to indict. No constable comes. The court has no interest. Her dreams are her own now. And so she continues, her voice slowly fading into the corners of Salem's collective hearing, until one day it is not heard at all. Elsewhere, the rhythm of life resumes, uneven but persistent. The meeting house gains a new minister, Joseph Green, young, modest, soft-spoken. He preaches humility, grace, and the dangers of certainty. There is a gentleness to his presence, and slowly he gathers those who still come on Sundays into a congregation that no longer watches its own with suspicion. He does not speak of demons, he speaks of healing. You sit beneath a tree one afternoon, listening to the sound of distant hammering as a barn is repaired. The children pass you by, playing again, though their laughter still carries something sharper beneath it, like they've inherited a memory they don't fully understand. Their games no longer include cries of witch or spectre. Those words have gone too far and cut too deep to be used in play anymore. You see Elizabeth Proctor now and then. Her child has been born, a boy. She named him after his father, John. The boy will never know his father, never see his eyes or hear his voice, but she carries the name forward like a vow. She tends her small plot of land quietly, refusing charity, answering only what is asked. She is not bitter, but she is not the same, and those who pass her in the market offer her space, respect, and sometimes an apology made without words. The jailer in Salem, once a man of few opinions, now walks with a visible stoop. He claims it's his back, that the years of lifting chains and doors have worn it down, but others say it's something else, the way he watches people too long, the way his hands twitch when someone raises their voice. He too was part of it, though no one indicts him. He was only following orders, that's what they all said. In nearby Andover, where the fever had briefly spread, a different kind of repentance has taken root. Entire families, those who once confessed under pressure or fear, have now signed petitions to clear the names of the dead. They write plainly, saying they were wrong, that no devil ever visited their homes, that they were coerced. The town clerk there, who had once catalogued each confession with careful ink, now documents their retractions with equal care. These scrolls, these apologies, are not merely symbolic. They begin to shape the way the events are remembered, not as proof of evil, but as proof of how easily fear can dress itself in righteousness. The records are preserved, but the tone has changed. And what of those who never confessed? Giles Corey's name is still spoken. The man pressed beneath stones has become, in whispers, a kind of symbol. His refusal to plead, his final words, more weight, linger in the air like a challenge, like a curse. There are those who say he haunts the land near Gallows Hill. Others claim to have heard nothing at all, but in quiet voices some call him brave. The land where the hangings took place remains empty. No homes are built there, no children play, grass grows long, and the wind moves through it like a breath withheld. Once a group of boys went there on a dare and returned pale and trembling, though they said only that the wind changed suddenly, and the air turned cold. No one speaks of doing it again. The memory of the trials is not carved in stone, not yet, but it has begun to settle into the bones of the place, not as history, but as something lived, breathed, and carried. The names of the dead are spoken more often now, not in accusation but in remembrance. Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, Martha Corey, George Burroughs. Names said slowly, reverently, as if saying them with care might lay them to rest at last. You notice something else now. People begin to write, not just the judges or ministers, but ordinary villagers, young girls who kept to the margins, men who feared they'd be next. They begin to write their memories, their doubts, their fear of what they saw in others and what they found in themselves. These letters will not all survive, but the act of writing them is, in itself, a kind of unbinding. Not from guilt, but from silence. And Ann Putnam, she writes too. She's seen often with a journal, plain and bound with leather. Sometimes she sits beneath the same tree where you now rest and writes for hours, her face unreadable. She speaks to no one while she writes. But when she rises, she often leaves a small page behind, torn, scrawled with a single thought or phrase. Some are verses from scripture, others are harder to place. One, found one morning and passed from hand to hand, reads, "There is a quiet that follows a storm, and in it you must listen, not speak." You remember that line for a long time, because in Salem now, that's what most have learned to do, to listen. Not for the devil, not for spirits, but for themselves. As the calendar turns toward autumn, the edges of the village begin to change again. The trees, so full in summer, begin to thin their shade. The fields yellow in patches. Crows wheel above the cornstalks. The days shorten imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably, and the shadows return a little earlier each evening. And still, no stones rise where the hanged were buried. There are no gravestones on Gallows Hill, no markers to say where the bodies lie, no carved names or chiselled verses of peace. The condemned were denied the rites of burial, denied sacred ground, denied final words spoken over their remains, and so they remain, if anywhere, in memory alone, ghosts without graves. But the people begin to remember them differently. At first, there are only a few, a small bundle of flowers tied with twine, left at the foot of the hill on a clear October morning, a scrap of linen pinned to the fence behind the jail, embroidered with initials, RN, or perhaps MC. A child, no older than 6, leaves a carved apple on a wooden post, saying nothing to the adults who ask, only looking toward the trees with an expression far too serious for her age. You hear whispers in the village of people dreaming of the dead. Not hauntings, not the kind that frightened them before, when devils and witches were blamed for every cracked bowl and strange sound in the night, but dreams of those they wronged. Rebecca Nurse appearing in the field behind a neighbour's house, standing among the tall grasses with her hands folded. George Jacobs kneeling in the corner of a room, not moving, only watching. These stories are no longer shouted. They are whispered, and not always with fear. Sometimes with apology. The dreams spread. Even those who never spoke against the dead begin to see them. The line between guilt and memory begins to blur, and it is not only in dreams. At town meetings, questions are asked about the official records. Why were certain names written down in red ink? Why were the petitions ignored? Who signed the orders of arrest and why? There are no satisfying answers, only shrugs, or lowered eyes, or the dry claim that it was a different time. But the records remain, and more than a few begin to study them. A small group forms quietly, consisting of villagers who lost family, others who once testified and now wish to make things right, and those who simply cannot sleep without knowing more. They meet behind the meeting house, or in a corner of the proctor's old barn, and they bring with them scraps of parchment, letters, and memories. Together they begin writing a fuller account, not just of the trials, but of everything around them. The suspicions, the weather, the illnesses, the political unrest, the thefts, the rivalries, the sermons. They want more than anything to understand, and with understanding they begin to mourn properly. Not all are ready. Some never will be. You pass one house often, shutters drawn, the air around it heavy with resentment. The man who lives there was once a constable. He still believes he was only doing his duty. When he walks through the village, children grow silent. He does not seem to notice, or perhaps he notices everything, but others are changing. The Nurse family's planting again. Their fields, long left to dry, have rows of cabbage and squash returning in neat lines. The Corey land, inherited by distant cousins, is quiet and overgrown but still visited. Sometimes a girl with dark hair sits beneath the boundary tree sketching in the dirt with a stick. No one knows who she is, but she comes often. Even the church bells sound different now, less commanding, more reflective. Minister Joseph Green begins holding evening prayers, not for repentance, but for healing. He speaks less of doctrine, more of mercy. The congregation does not grow fast, but those who come do not leave early anymore. You walk through the village one dusk as the first frost creeps across the edges of the grass. The light has turned the colour of copper, and the sky hangs low and stretched. Smoke from hearths curls gently above rooftops. You pass a fence post marked with the same 2 chalk lines, now redrawn in charcoal. It is fading, but still visible. Anne Putnam still writes, still walks, still listens more than she speaks. She's seen often near Gallows Hill, though she never climbs it. She simply stands nearby, hands folded, eyes distant. When asked, she says nothing. She only turns and walks back home. There are those who say she's trying to hear them, the dead, not to summon them, not to find forgiveness, but simply to understand what it is to be remembered without a resting place. Because that is what these villagers have inherited. Not curses, not bloodlines, but memory. The kind that lingers like fog across the moor. The kind that changes the shape of silence. And though no gravestones have yet risen on the hill, the land itself has become a kind of marker. A place where something once happened that cannot fully be named. A place where Salem still listens for the voices it once silenced. By the first snows of winter, 1693, Salem's landscape begins to seem familiar again, but only on the surface. The old paths are trodden once more, the way to the well, the cart trail to the mill, the steps to the meeting house. But beneath each footprint lies something different now, something unsettled. The land has not changed, not in shape or form, but in feeling. It's as though every corner has learned to carry a memory. You walk beneath a sky the colour of slate, and the trees, stripped bare, lean as if to listen. There is no wind, only the slow, persistent cold that seeps through coat and cloth, the kind that makes people wrap tighter around themselves as they pass one another. Some still make eye contact, others do not. In Boston, words of correction have finally begun to take form beyond sermons and personal letters. Governor Phipps, who once disbanded the Court of Oyer and Terminer in the thick of panic, now faces mounting pressure. from ministers, from merchants, from common citizens, each voice different, yet each asking the same. How will we live with this? How will we speak of what we did? And so, the first official motions begin. An order is passed to bar further arrests for witchcraft. The jails begin to empty, slowly and with little ceremony. Those who had been confined for months are released into a world that watched them vanish, and now watches them return, unsure how to welcome them. Some, like Elizabeth Proctor, walk free into homes that have waited, held open by hope or obligation. Others return to empty cabins, where doors groan on hinges and dust has gathered on their own belongings. A few leave the province altogether, seeking quieter lives where no one recognises their names. One man, Jonathan Dunham, walks the length of Essex County from Salem to Ipswich to find his cousin's family. He'd spent 7 months in prison, never tried, never questioned beyond the initial accusation, and now finds his name is hardly spoken anymore, not from fear, but from shame. People cannot meet his eyes, even those who once called him friend. The shame is not just personal, it is communal. The colony's ministers, sensing this, draft a letter, signed by several of the most respected names in New England, acknowledging that mistakes were made, that the trials were carried on with too much haste and too little evidence. It does not go so far as to call the hangings murder, but it leans in that direction, gently, like a door left ajar for others to finish opening, and others do. At the meeting house in Salem, Minister Green invites descendants of the accused to read the names aloud, not in court, not in judgment, just aloud before the congregation. They gather one cold morning, hesitant, uncertain, standing in a semicircle near the front as the minister lights a single candle. You are there, seated near the back, the wood of the pew hard beneath you, your hands buried deep in your sleeves. You hear each name spoken in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, George Burroughs, John Proctor, Martha Carrier, Elizabeth Howe, Samuel Wardwell. Names that were once said in fear or condemnation are now spoken with the weight of sorrow, and the church is silent except for their voices. No thunderclaps, no ghostly cries, just breath and time and recognition. The minister closes with a prayer not of repentance but of responsibility. Outside, a few snowflakes drift down. They cling to the wool coats and scarves, melt slowly against the heat of skin, and disappear. But the names linger. That's what matters now. It is around this time that a peculiar quiet settles over Salem, not the fearful silence of accusation, but a deep, exhausted quiet that follows too much noise. A quiet that lets you think. You begin to see changes in how people speak to each other, not grand ones, just small hesitations before they mention the events of the past year, a pause before using certain names, an effort, almost invisible, to speak more carefully, to ask more gently, to look people in the eye when they might once have looked away. The village schoolmaster, who once had to discipline students for shouting "witch" at one another, now teaches a different lesson. He asks his pupils to bring stories from home, not tales of spirits or omens, but real memories from their parents and grandparents. He teaches them how to listen, and that, more than anything, becomes the new practice in Salem, the skill of listening, to stories, to silence, to each other. Anne Putnam continues to attend meeting house prayers. Sometimes she speaks to the minister after the service. She does not read her writings aloud, but she still writes. One Sunday she leaves a folded note on the pulpit. It is brief, a single sentence. What we feared became more powerful than what we knew. It's posted beside the door for weeks before anyone takes it down. Others begin to speak up as well. One of the afflicted girls, Mary Warren, has returned to her family, and though she avoids crowds, she's seen near the fields again. She walks with a limp now, though no one remembers her having one before. She declines to speak of what happened, but she's been seen weeping behind the barn at dusk, her hands pressed flat to her face, her whole body still. It is not enough to undo what was done, but it is the beginning of something else, not healing exactly, something more like endurance, a quiet undoing of the knots that hysteria tied. The law will eventually offer restitution, small amounts, a declaration. It will come later, but in these months what matters most is unspoken. The return to decency, the softening of hard beliefs, the shared knowledge that they were all, each and every one of them, capable of terrible certainty. And now they must live with that, with each other, with themselves. And in this, a different kind of trial begins, one without judges or gallows, one that lasts far longer. As winter settles fully over the Massachusetts colony, the roads between the villages harden with ice, and the trees creak and groan beneath their coats of frost. The air is sharp and clean, and at night the stars shine with a clarity that almost feels cruel, indifferent to what has passed beneath them. In Salem the snow falls quietly, covering the roofs, the fields, the paths once travelled in fear. Everything appears softened, hushed, but no snow is thick enough to cover memory. You walk along the outer edge of the village one morning, boots crunching through the brittle crust of snow. The old cart path curves along the forest, and here and there broken fences stand like ribs from the past summer. Just beyond, the nurse homestead rises, silent beneath a white roof. You pause, and for a moment it feels as if nothing has ever changed here. Yet you know, as everyone does, that this house will never be the same, not since Rebecca was taken from it. Inside the nurse family's home, they are making preparations for a gathering, not of grief, but of purpose. They've invited neighbours, relatives, and even a few townsfolk from Danvers and Topsfield to share what they remember of the trials. The goal is not to accuse or even to reconcile. The goal is to speak, to name what happened, to give the story a shape beyond rumour and silence. These gatherings begin quietly, once a week at first. The guests sit in a ring around the hearth, steam rising from their cloaks as the fire crackles and the windows fog. The first time, no one speaks for nearly 10 minutes. Then a man named Ezra Langley, a distant cousin to Mary Esty, clears his throat and simply says, "I lied." That's all. Then silence again. But after that, others follow. A woman confesses she said nothing when her neighbour's child was taken to testify. She saw the child rehearsing behind the barn with one of the afflicted girls. She knew, but she said nothing. A man admits he helped write one of the arrest warrants. Another says he stood at Gallows Hill with the others and watched and did nothing. You listen, you watch their hands. You notice that most of them do not cry. They speak with hollow, measured voices as if they are recounting someone else's story. But the details are too exact. The sounds, the sights, the small gestures, they are etched too deeply to belong to anyone but them. And so the meetings continue. Word spreads. More people come. Some from Salem town, some from as far as Ipswich and Rowley. These are not officials, not clerics, not scholars. They are farmers, midwives, shopkeepers, mothers. They carry with them a history that was nearly lost, not because no one remembered, but because no one dared to remember aloud. A turning point comes when Samuel Nurse, Rebecca's son, reads aloud from a journal his mother kept in the months before her arrest. The words are faint, pressed into the paper with uneven hands. She had written about her fears, not of witches or demons, but of gossip, of the way people had begun to speak in fragments, in insinuations, with glances instead of full thoughts. She wrote, "It is not the devil who destroys a town, but the whisper that names him." The room is silent when he finishes. Then a woman in the corner, whom no one has seen before, stands. She's older than most, her back slightly bent, her eyes pale but clear. She removes her gloves slowly and says, "I was one of the first to call a name." Her voice does not tremble, and I have lived every day since with the weight of that name on my back. She does not say which name. No one asks, but everyone hears her. After that night, the gatherings become known as the Circle. They are not official, not sanctioned by the church or colony, but they grow. Others begin to write down their memories, placing them in a small wooden chest kept by the Nurse family. Letters, notes, even confessions. They are not collected for punishment. They are collected for truth. Outside the Circle, life continues. Wood must still be chopped, animals fed, children taught. But beneath it all, this reckoning hums quietly. Like water moving beneath ice, the meeting house reflects this shift. Minister Green speaks more often of doubt, not as weakness, but as a tool. He quotes from scripture, yes, but also from letters sent by villagers themselves. One Sunday he reads aloud, "When the truth is hard to name, it waits in silence, but it does not die." The pews are fuller now. not because people are drawn to sermons of fear or salvation, but because they sense something changing in their village, something not yet healed, but no longer hidden. Meanwhile, the official courts begin to respond. Petitions sent months earlier are finally acknowledged. In January of 1694, a proclamation is drafted in Boston, a day of fasting and prayer to be observed throughout the province, in remembrance of the errors and judgments passed in haste and error. It is a small step, but it is public, and it names the thing, error. The fast is held in the spring, but people begin preparing long before, not by abstaining from food, but by examining themselves. More confessions are written. Ministers reread their own sermons with regret. Some even apologise from the pulpit, and those who were once silent begin to speak. Anne Putnam remains quiet, but her presence is constant. She listens at every circle, walks with the ministers, helps write the names of the dead in a growing ledger kept behind the pulpit. She is not the girl she once was. Something in her posture, in her quiet devotion, tells you that she has shouldered the long winter of memory and made peace with its weight. Or at least she carries it without stumbling now. And slowly, in this season of reckoning, the village begins to breathe differently. No one speaks of witches anymore, but they do speak of fear, of pride, of silence, of the cost of certainty. These words enter the fabric of daily life, not as burdens but as reminders, that the past was not a fever, it was a choice, and that it need not be repeated so long as it is remembered. The day the river froze all the way through, the air was so still you could hear the wings of birds overhead. The frost had crept in slow through January, but now, deep into February, it had gripped the land completely. Even the sea smoke from the coast hovered low and motionless, clinging to the edges of the bay like a breath held too long. And in Salem, where so much had once moved in restless, panicked motion, feet running on dirt paths, voices rising in protest or plea, the hammer of gallows wood being fixed into place, there was, at last, a moment of profound stillness. The North River, winding past the village like a cold blue ribbon, had finally frozen thick enough that children could walk across it, testing the ice with small feet and shouts that turned to laughter. You saw them there, bundled and red-cheeked, carving shapes with their heels into the frost. But among them, a girl paused alone near the river's bend, the place where the water once ran faster in spring. She stood still, looking down at the frozen surface. You recognised her, Sarah Cloyce's youngest, grown taller now. Her mother, spared the noose, had never fully returned to village life, but her children did. And there the girl stood, watching her own reflection flicker in the opaque greyish ice. Reflections were on many minds that winter. It had been a year and more since the worst of it had passed, but the sense of aftermath clung like smoke that won't lift from the rafters. Salem wasn't ruined, not in the way of cities after fires or battles, but it was changed, subtly and entirely, not by destruction, but by knowledge. And knowledge, once rooted, does not unroot easily. The circle continued through the winter, huddled closer now in smaller rooms by firelight and candle stub. They met not just in homes, but in the old tavern cellar, in the back of the cobbler's shop, wherever a hearth could be coaxed to warmth. People still brought letters, confessions, questions. The chest in the nurse home had long since filled, and a second one was built. Not every entry was signed. Some were short, just a name, a date, a line scrawled in nervous hand. I watched her fall. I told them what I heard, even though I had not heard it. My silence brought me bread. By February there were hundreds. Minister Green had begun reading them aloud in private meetings with other clergy, not to accuse or punish, but to hold the weight of what had passed. He believed, as he told you once in a slow walk through the snow behind the meeting house, that words withheld become rot. That memory needs airing the way bread needs breath, or else it hardens into something inedible. The colony's council had received word of the circle, and some feared retribution, but it never came. Perhaps the officials were relieved to see the village handling what they themselves had not. Perhaps they understood that healing, to be real, must come from those closest to the wound. It was during one such February meeting that a parchment was brought forward, this one folded carefully, tied with ribbon, sealed with wax. No name, just the date, written plainly across the front, March 25th, 1692. It was the day Giles Corey had first refused to enter a plea. Inside the folded note were only 2 lines, ink dark and firm. He would not lie, and he would not name, even when the stone kissed his ribs. I held the lever. The room went very quiet. The man who had brought it, red-faced and older than most, stood with his hat crushed in his hands. He did not speak. He did not stay. He left before the fire cracked again. You helped fold the paper back and place it into the new chest. These were the sorts of truths that didn't fit neatly into sermons. They didn't ease the conscience. They only made space for it to exist. Meanwhile, outside the warmth of firelit rooms, the village carried on. Bread was baked. Chickens were kept. A few marriages occurred modestly with wreaths of pine and candle stubs lighting their path. Even the children, who had once shouted accusations in the square or stood witness to their parents' terror, now played games that no longer mimic trials. The witch games, as they had been called, had vanished from play altogether. No one had to forbid them. They simply stopped. The landscape helped. The snow blanketed everything in soft uniformity. Old gallows, ground, field and path looked the same under snow. The starkness helped erase certain outlines, but never the meaning beneath. You still knew where the wrong steps had been taken. One afternoon, Ann Putnam passed by the river's edge, pausing beside the stone bridge that crossed to the town's far side. She stood a long time, gloved hands folded in front of her, watching the children skating farther out across the frozen surface. She did not speak to them. She only watched. When she turned to leave, you noticed a slip of paper had fallen behind her, half tucked into the snow. You picked it up. A prayer. Not in her handwriting, but older. It had been copied. Lord, deliver me from unquiet spirits and from the ease of forgetting. Let the names of those undone by my words rise like smoke until I learn to see them clearly. That night, you sat by your own fire longer than usual, turning the words over, not as condemnation, but as echo. Because that was what Salem had become, a place of echoes, but not only of the past. Now they reached forward too, into the habits of the present, into the shaping of children, into the rebuilding of what trust means, when trust had once broken so thoroughly. And as the wind howled through the cracks in the windows, and the timbers creaked, and the river beyond the trees stayed frozen beneath the stars, you understood something. The freeze was not a death. It was a pause, a holding of breath, a waiting for the thaw, not of the land alone, but of the soul. The thaw didn't announce itself with fanfare. It crept in quietly, with a morning of soft drip-drip sounds from the eaves, a patch of wet earth near the well, a sheen of water over the pond where ice had ruled for months. Even the air felt different, as if something tight had loosened just slightly. A subtle softness returned to the soil, a suggestion of green beneath the snow's stubborn final crust. You woke that day to the scent of wet wood and chimney smoke, the sounds of crows arguing in the bare trees above your roof. The village looked as it had for months, but it no longer felt quite the same. People opened shutters a little earlier, doors stayed ajar longer. Paths reappeared as snow receded from the edges. Something had shifted. Not enough to say aloud, not yet, but enough that your steps felt less heavy as you walked into town. Inside the meeting house, Minister Green had begun preparing a sermon for the spring fast, though the congregation had already begun observing it in their own ways. Some fasted with food, others with silence. Some took long walks beyond the village, toward places they had avoided. Gallows Hill, the old jail site, the broken field behind the parsonage. You saw one woman kneeling at the edge of a half-frozen creek, running her fingers through the water, over and over, as if hoping to find something in its chill. But more striking than fasting or prayer was what began to grow out of that long winter of reckoning. The idea that what had happened could not remain simply as pain. It had to become something else, something that might speak to those who came after. Not just in stories told by candlelight or names whispered at dusk, but in something physical, deliberate, enduring. So they began to speak of memory as something to build. It was young Sarah Cloyce, the same girl who had stood by the river during the deepest cold, who asked first, plainly, "Why don't they have graves?" Her question was not meant as accusation. She was too young to remember the summer of the hangings, but not too young to understand that something sacred had been denied. The dead of 1692 had no stone, no marker, no space to say. They were here. Her words stirred something. Within a fortnight, a plan was quietly forming. It started with a few families, the nurses, the Jacobses, the Coreys, meeting in the orchard near the edge of the village. They stood beneath bare trees, heavy coats still pulled tight, and spoke of what could be done. Not to undo the past, but to mark it. The idea wasn't a grand monument, no marble, no iron. That would not have suited Salem. It was to be a small garden, enclosed by stone, where the names could be spoken aloud and set into wood or slate. Not to glorify them, only to remember. A place that said, these people lived and died and were wronged. It was John Proctor's grandson who offered the land, an unused rise behind the sheep pasture, bordered by 3 elms and a dry creek bed. It was quiet, set apart. You visited it once, on a windy afternoon, and saw where they had already begun clearing brush and marking corners with rough stones. A circle was taking shape, not perfect but intentional, measured. You could almost see where the names would rest. The village did not speak openly of the garden, not at first. It was still too raw for some. But the work continued. Young men hauled timbers for benches, women brought seeds, lavender, thyme, rosemary, rue. A few old copies of scripture were used to select verses. Nothing damning, only those that asked for mercy, for truth, for remembrance. Minister Green never preached about it. But he came one afternoon, laid his hands on the stone that would bear the first name, Rebecca Nurse, and simply nodded. No one needed more, and so it grew. The soil was still too hard for real planting, but they scattered ash across the beds and laid out the paths. They brought pebbles from the river to line the base of the entry gate. Ann Putnam brought a small wooden cross, uncarved, and tied it with ribbon to the southern fence post. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Word spread beyond Salem. Families from Ipswich, Andover, and even further north sent letters, names, memories. They too had lost people. Not all to the gallows, some to prisons, to exile, to madness. They asked if their loved ones might also be named, their stories kept. The garden widened. It was no longer just for the hanged. It became a place to hold the full weight of what had happened. To say, this is where our fear led us, and this is what it cost. The children were brought there, carefully, one by one. Not to frighten them, but to show them what silence could become, and what courage looked like. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that kneels in the dirt and plants memory like a seed. And as the first true melt came in the early March, you walked along the edge of that ground and heard for the first time in many months the sound of new water flowing in the creek beside the stone wall. Thin, tentative, cold, but moving. The thaw had come, not just to the earth, but to the story itself. By mid-March, the thaw had deepened. Mud gathered in the village paths, sticky and rich with the scent of buried months. The snowbanks withdrew in uneven borders along the fences, leaving behind patches of matted grass and broken twigs. The birds returned in cautious pairs, perching on bare branches and calling out with voices that seemed too bright for such a heavy season. And in the small garden behind the pasture, the names began to arrive. They did not come as carvings or headstones, not yet. They came as slips of paper, folded carefully, pinned beneath river stones or tucked into cracks in the newly raised fence. Some were full names, others only initials. A few were single words. Mother, friend, innocent. You noticed one placed alone on the northern edge of the garden. An old yellowed letter, the ink barely holding to the parchment. The only legible line read, "She was never even afraid of the dark." Each evening someone would walk the perimeter of the garden and collect these quiet offerings. You did it once, your fingers cold and damp as you slid them over the rough stone to gather each note. There was no ceremony, only the quiet practice of reading them aloud beside the fire in the Nurse family's parlour. One by one they were added to the ledger. They called it the Ledger of Silence because most of the names had been spoken only in secret or not at all. This ledger, unlike court records, bore no dates of accusation, no details of confession, no signatures of judges. It only held names, and the hope that someone remembered them rightly. The garden slowly took on a strange kind of life, even before a single thing had bloomed. The villagers passed it now with less hesitation, some pausing to run a hand along the fence or whisper a name before continuing their walk. A few brought children to sit on the benches in the afternoon sun. They didn't explain everything, only enough. enough for the young ones to ask questions that the previous generation had been too afraid to speak aloud. And it was during this new season of naming that Anne Putnam made a decision that rippled across every family, every street, every soul still knotted around that year. She would speak. For months she'd been present but silent, helping with the circle, writing letters, listening more than anyone else. But now she approached Minister Green one quiet morning at the edge of the meeting house steps and said only, "It's time." It was not a confession. She had already made that privately to those she'd wronged directly. Nor was it an apology in the formal sense. It was something more unusual and more difficult. A public testimony, carefully worded, written in her own hand, to be read aloud by the minister before the entire congregation. The date was chosen, March 25th, exactly 2 years after the day her accusations had set the whole chain in motion. Word spread quickly, and on that morning, every bench in the meeting house was full. Some stood outside the doors, the windows left open to let the words drift to those who waited beneath the budding trees. You stood near the rear, shoulder to shoulder with men and women whose names had appeared on petitions, on warrants, on depositions. There was no noise but the creak of wood and the shuffle of breath. Minister Green stepped to the pulpit. He did not open a Bible. He opened the paper. In a slow, steady voice, he read her words. She called herself deluded by the devil, not in the way of witchcraft, but in the way of pride and blindness and fear. She named those who had died, Rebecca, Giles, John, Martha, Mary, and said she could never forget their faces. She said she'd believed she was doing right, but that she now saw the cost of her belief. She said she would live every year of her life not in penance, but in service, to the truth, to remembrance, and to peace. The room remained still for many long moments after he finished. Then someone stood. A woman near the front, old and hunched. She turned and nodded once toward Anne, who stood with her head bowed near the side door. Another stood, a man this time, then more. Not clapping, not cheering, just standing, holding silence with her instead of against her. It was in its way an absolution, but no one called it that. They just called it the day the names were returned. After the gathering, many walked to the garden. Some placed new names along the stone wall. Others brought twigs of pine and bay to lay at the base of the bench where Anne now often sat in the afternoons, hands still, eyes distant but unafraid. You stayed until dusk that evening, watching the shadows stretch long over the ground that once bore no mark at all. The garden was still. The wind was warm enough to carry the scent of turned soil and old wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance a child's voice carried through the trees, not crying, not frightened, just singing, softly, to themselves, and beneath it all the silence of names, no longer forgotten, only remembered. As April arrived, the earth softened enough to dig, not just shallow cuts for planting, but deeper ones, steady and clean, as if the ground itself had decided it was ready to yield. You could see it in the way the garden plots darkened, in the way the roots gave way more easily beneath careful hands. The villagers came with spades and wooden markers. They brought small stones from their hearths, handfuls of herbs wrapped in cloth, bits of ribbon, and tokens of quiet meaning. And though no one called it burial, that's what it felt like. Something being laid down, finally, with intention. Not bodies, but memory. The garden was nearly complete. It bore no gate, only a narrow arch of cedar wood, unpainted, under which a single word was carved: remembrance. Beneath it the paths curved inward, leading to a central circle of low stones where the names would be set, not in a line, not like a list, but scattered, so you had to walk among them to read them, to understand the fullness of what had happened. There was no order to them, no rank, no date of death, only the names, and space between them for breath. You remember the day they placed the first slate marker, Rebecca Nurse's name etched by her own grandson, the letters uneven but firm. He held it in his lap for a long time before setting it in the earth. A silence settled over the watchers, not mourning exactly, more like reverence, an awareness that the world had changed shape just slightly in the moment the stone met soil. Others followed: Giles Corey, Martha and John Carrier, Mary Parker, George Burroughs. Some names were carved by descendants, others by friends or neighbours who had once stood silent. Each one, when placed, seemed to draw the breath from the air, then return it, altered. But as the markers appeared, so did something else, something less visible, but just as real. People began to talk of the places they had hidden things, confessionals written and buried behind barns, books thrown into wells, charms and tokens burned in secret, not because they were witchcraft, but because they belonged to those who'd been named. The past had not only been erased in memory, it had been buried in physical ways, and now, with the garden rising, those who had once feared to hold such objects began to wonder if they should be recovered. So they searched. Behind floorboards, in the rafters of sheds, beneath loose stones and the roots of old trees, they found what had once been cast aside. An iron kettle that had belonged to Bridget Bishop, a length of red wool worn by Sarah Good, a page from a lost diary belonging to Mary Easty, its ink bled but still legible in parts. You helped unearth a small wooden box from behind the abandoned parsonage, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with pitch. Inside were 3 rough-carved dolls and a scrap of linen embroidered with the initials RN. These objects, once feared or discarded, were now held with care. Not relics, not trophies, just pieces of lives interrupted, pieces of lives returned. Some were brought to the meeting house, where they were displayed quietly in a long chest near the back pew. No sign, no description, only a candle lit beside it, and a book for names. People came and looked. Some left notes, some wept. Others touched the edge of the chest and left in silence, but not everyone approved. There were still those in Salem, and the wider colony, who wished the past would remain buried, who found the garden uncomfortable, who felt the ledger, the objects, the confessions. These only stirred up guilt best forgotten. One afternoon, you heard a voice at the edge of the garden mutter, "Let the dead lie." A man from Danvers, once a deputy in the jails. He stood with arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and left without walking the paths. But such resistance came quieter now, and less often. The truth had taken root, and like the thaw, it could not be reversed. On the eve of planting season, the circle met for the final time that spring. You sat with them near the edge of the orchard, the trees just beginning to bud. Minister Green read aloud from the ledger, not every name, but enough. The wind moved through the grass, lanterns flickered, and when he finished, no one clapped, or prayed, or sang. They simply sat together and let the moment stretch unbroken. Later that night, as you walked home, you passed the old gallows ground one more time. The grass was high now, softening the contours of where the scaffold had once stood. It looked ordinary, unmarked. But you noticed something near the edge of the hill, a single daffodil, bright and yellow, blooming alone. You bent to look at it, and saw beside it a stone, half buried, with the letter E scratched into its surface. No one else had come here in days. You did not move the stone. Some things are best left just as they are. But you understood then what the garden truly meant. Not a place to mourn, a place to carry forward, to speak aloud what had once been locked behind fear, to walk the path of names and say, not just that they died, but that they lived, that they mattered, that history, like the earth, must be turned over now and then if it is to grow anything worth remembering. And in that turning, the past becomes something else, not lighter, but bearable. By the time May had arrived, the village roads were dry and dust-streaked again. Birds returned to the eaves, and the first market stalls appeared along the meeting house green. Salem moved into a season it hadn't known for years, a spring without trials, without jails, without whispered accusations curling like smoke from house to house. But what lingered now was quieter, and in some ways, heavier. The unspoken question that passed behind every conversation, woven into the edges of daily life. How had they believed it? How had you believed it? It was easy to say it had been fear, or God's wrath, or the devil's whisperings. But belief was more complicated than that. Belief was not always loud. Sometimes it came in the form of silence, averted eyes, the refusal to speak when a neighbour vanished. It came in sermons, yes, but also in glances passed over supper tables, in the steady erosion of doubt by the weight of everyone else's certainty. And now, as you walked these paths again, passing the parsonage ruins, the now empty jail, it was the shape of belief itself that began to reveal its consequences. Anne Putnam understood this, perhaps better than anyone. Her words had calmed many, but they had not freed her. She remained in Salem, though she could have left. She continued to help in the garden, she continued to listen, but her face bore the years more quickly now. You saw her often near the edge of the nurse homestead, staring into the orchard or standing by the old stone wall that bordered the eastern wood. She had begun writing something, not a diary, not a confession, but a kind of record. She called it the Book of Reckonings. It wasn't meant to be published or even shared widely. It was simply her way of placing each event, each name, into a timeline of her own making, not to justify, but to understand. To ask what thread of belief had carried her from one decision to the next, and why none of the adults had truly stopped her. One entry read, "I believed they were witches because I wanted to believe I was good, and if they were not witches, then I was not good, and that I could not bear." Another read, "We were told the devil came with needles and marks and shadows, but he came as fear, as loneliness, as the hunger to be right." And still another, "No one ever told me doubt was holy, only faith, but they never said faith can wound when wielded in blindness." Her book would never be read in meeting house sermons, it would not replace the court records. But those who sat with her, who heard her read these words aloud in the hush of twilight, felt something shift. They too began to ask, what had they believed, and why? Some told their children stories now with more pauses, more questions. They left room for uncertainty. They taught them that God might test faith, yes, but also that faith without mercy was something else entirely. In this season of reflection, the trials were not forgotten. They were studied, by candlelight, by scholars, by mothers teaching daughters how to read, by fathers no longer so quick to scold questions. People began seeking out the older women, the ones who had survived, who had kept to themselves for years. Their memories were drawn out, not in the way of accusation, but of honour, of learning. You visited Mary Bradbury's cousin, now in her 90s, who spoke with a soft, brittle voice about the way the jail had smelled, about the sound of weeping that came from the corner cell when the lanterns were extinguished. She told you how the jailer once wept himself but never admitted it. She said, they wanted to be righteous. But righteousness doesn't always wear truth. Sometimes it puts on fear like a second skin, and it was fear, always fear, that bound so many of them together, long after the gallows were taken down. Some in the village still struggled to name their part. Not all had spoken aloud their regrets. One man, a former juror, was seen walking alone beyond the fields most evenings, carrying nothing. His wife said he barely spoke anymore, but once you saw him standing by the new garden fence, hand resting on a slate stone. The name was unfamiliar to him, perhaps, but the act of touching, of remembering, was not. Belief, you began to understand, was a kind of inheritance, not always questioned, not always examined, and sometimes passed down so gently that no one knew it was there until it was too late. But now, here in the soft green of spring, with the trees heavy with blossoms and the sky slow to darken, Salem was beginning to ask harder questions, not just about witches, but about what had been lost when no one had dared to say, I don't know if this is right, and maybe that was the quiet reckoning that came last, not with fire, not with gallows, not with names in court, but with a long silence that followed a question, a pause that allowed someone to say, I'm not sure, and another to answer, that's enough for now. And in that space something gentle returned. Not innocence, that was gone, but something maybe even more valuable, the freedom to doubt, and in doubt at last a kind of peace. Summer crept into Salem slowly that year, warm and cautious, as if uncertain it was welcome. The fields grew thick with green, the hedgerows bloomed heavy with wild rose, and the rivers ran fast with the melted weight of spring. But under the soft air and clearer skies, something else had begun, a kind of reckoning beyond memory, not spoken aloud in sermons or formal apologies, but drawn in the land itself, in the way people began to move through it differently. Paths shifted, routes altered, homes once left behind were approached again, and slowly, quietly, the town began to map its own story. It was Reverend Green who first spoke of making such a map, not for navigation, but for truth. A record not just of where the accused had lived, or where they had been arrested, but of what had happened in each place, what had been said, who had listened, who had looked away. The idea was not greeted with excitement. Some feared it would reopen wounds that had never quite healed. Others simply didn't want their family names tied to a tree in a field, or a house with a broken chimney. But the map began anyway, not with pen and parchment, but with footsteps. You remember the first day vividly, June light slanting low across the pastures, a soft wind carrying the scent of clover and dust. A group of 10 gathered with Minister Green at the old road that once led toward Andover. No ceremony, just a pause, then a step forward. The ground was uneven and the quiet deep. When they reached the clearing, where one of the first arrests had taken place, Green set a marker in the soil. Not a sign, not even a name, just a smooth piece of river slate, etched with the symbol of a compass rose. North, east, south, west. 4 directions, 4 chances to choose differently. From there, they continued. Slowly, week by week, they walked the old roads and paths, placing these subtle stones, always the same symbol, always the same material. Some were placed near homes that still stood, others at ruined foundations or in the middle of fields where the wind no longer remembered screams. Over time, the villagers began to follow the path of these markers. Children would run ahead to find the next one. Elders would stop and rest beside them, telling the younger ones what they remembered, if they remembered at all. It became a different kind of map, not geographic, emotional, moral. A map of choices made, voices silenced, and the spaces where courage had failed. You joined one of the walks out toward Ipswich Road. It was high summer then, and the grasses stood tall, waving like water under the hot sky. At a bend in the trail, an older woman paused and pointed to a low mound nearly hidden in the weeds. "That's where they questioned Susanna Martin," she said, "under the sycamore tree, tied her hands and left her in the sun." No one spoke. A few moved forward and gently cleared the grass around the base. Someone laid down a stone. At each sight the silence grew heavier, not with shame, but with depth. You began to understand that this too was a form of healing, not through forgetting, but through presence, through returning to the places once avoided and choosing to remain a while, choosing to name them, choosing to feel the discomfort and still stay standing. In the evenings, children began to draw their own maps on scraps of paper, crude sketches of the village, the hills, the rivers, and on them they marked the compass stones. But they also added stars and names of birds and old legends they'd heard from their grandmothers. Their maps, unlike the one the circle was building, told of dreams as much as history. And maybe that was necessary too, a counterweight to all that had been lost. Eventually the circle decided the map should be written down, properly. A long scroll, hand-drawn, with paths traced in ink, and each compass stone numbered and labelled. You were asked to help. It took many weeks. Each location had to be remembered carefully, cross-checked against testimonies, journals, even old court documents. The work was slow, sometimes painful, but meticulous. Every detail mattered. And at the top of the map, in large, careful letters, you wrote, "A map of the Salem affliction, for the bearing of witness, and the guidance of those who walk after." When it was finished, it was placed in the meeting house, not framed or enshrined, but laid flat in a wooden case under glass where anyone could open it. Look at it, trace it, add to it. Some did. New notations appeared, not always about the trials, but about moments of resistance, moments of care. Here, a neighbour fed the widow Parker when no one else would. Here, John Alden refused to sign the petition. Here, a young girl lied to protect her brother. History, you realised, was not only made in the moment of judgment, it was also made in the quiet acts of choosing, who to believe, who to doubt, when to speak, when to walk away. These were the places that had shaped the town just as much as the gallows. And so the map grew, not to assign blame, but to keep eyes open, to walk with awareness, to walk with humility. One night near midsummer, you followed the path alone, tracing the compass stones from the parsonage ruins to the old jail and out toward Gallows Hill. You passed a few others doing the same. No one spoke. There was only the crunch of footfall, the sound of wind in the dry grass. And when you reached the final stone, placed where the scaffold had once stood, you rested your hand against it and looked up. The stars were clear above you, quiet, indifferent. But beneath them, the land was marked now, not with ash or fire, but with memory. A memory shaped like a compass, not to guide you. Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping softly into a world that once pulsed with whispers, shadows, and candlelight. A world that lived and breathed under the wooden beams of Puritan homes and behind the tightly drawn shutters of colonial Massachusetts. We're returning to the quiet but charged days of 1692, to Salem village, to try and understand, gently, calmly, and deeply, what really happened during the Salem witch trials. Before we begin this slow, wandering journey into the past, I'd love for you to pause and comment below where you're listening from, your country or city, and what time it is where you are. I always find it soothing to know where all of you are drifting off from, all across the map. Now, get cozy. Let your arms rest, let your shoulders fall. Maybe you're lying down in bed, maybe the lights are off and your room is quiet, or maybe you've got a soft lamp glowing nearby. Wherever you are, let's go gently together into a story woven from history, dust and silence. Let's begin. The year is 1692. You're in a small village on the edge of wilderness, a place where the wind doesn't whisper, it scratches at the wood. A thin crust of snow lies heavy on the uneven rooftops of Salem village. The world feels narrowed, fields are barren, the trees skeletal, and the roads are more mud than earth. You pull your shawl tighter, the chill clinging to your ribs. This winter is quieter than most, or perhaps it just feels that way. Life in Salem isn't fast, it doesn't roar, it rustles. You rise with the sun, you sleep when the fire dies low, you gather wood, you churn butter, you bow your head in prayer, not just once, but often. The sermons are long, laced with warnings, woven with images of fire and damnation. The devil is not a metaphor here. He's real, he's watching, and more than that, he's tempting. Your home is made of timber, simple and strong. There are 4 of you, or 6, or 10, depending on who has survived the last season. The days are mostly the same: work, worship, worry. The world outside the village is vast, wild. Inside, it's even more dangerous, because trust here is fragile. Honour is everything. Sin, even imagined, can rot through the strongest name like worms in fruit. At the centre of Salem village stands the meeting house, a wooden draughty building that serves as both church and court. Reverend Samuel Parris preaches from the pulpit every Sunday, with a voice that thunders more than it soothes. He speaks of hell, of temptation, of the devil's cunning. And lately, he's been speaking of witchcraft. You've heard stories, tales of witches who ride through the skies, who spoil milk, wither crops, and send children into fits. But these are stories, aren't they? Still. In Reverend Parris's home, something strange is happening. His niece, Abigail Williams, and his daughter Betty have begun to behave in ways that make your skin crawl. They scream in church, they twist their bodies into unnatural shapes, they shout strange words and complain of invisible forces clawing at their skin. And when the doctor comes, for there is only one in the area, he offers a diagnosis that will change everything: witchcraft. You hear it on the wind first, a name, then another, then more, not shouted, but whispered, always whispered. The girls have begun to point fingers. First, it's to Tuba, the enslaved woman from Barbados who works in Reverend Parris's kitchen. People say she knows magic, that she talks of omens, that she makes witch cakes of rye and urine to identify the cursed. You've seen her before. Her voice is soft, her eyes always looking away. When they accuse her, she does not scream or deny. Instead, she confesses. That moment, soft, strange, barely understood, is where it truly begins. In the flickering firelight of February, Tituba tells of the devil. She says he came to her as a tall man, dressed in black, asking her to sign a book, and others, she claims, have signed too. You shiver. Not from the cold, from something else. Suddenly the devil isn't a distant fear. He's in Salem. He's among you. And worse, he might be someone you know. From that point on, your quiet village will unravel. One girl after another joins the afflicted. Their seizures grow more dramatic, their accusations more confident. Neighbours turn wary, families splinter. You feel it. A tightening, like the air itself is being pulled taut with suspicion. No longer is a knock on the door just a knock. No longer is a prayer just a prayer. They've begun to arrest people, ordinary people, midwives, widows, women who spoke too freely, men who questioned too much. And each arrest is accompanied by the same image of a cold cart rolling through muddy streets, of iron shackles, of the meeting house now echoing with cries not of joy or song, but of accusation. And you You're just trying to survive, to stay small, invisible. Because here in Salem, 1692, the line between safety and suspicion is vanishing fast. Tonight, let that thought drift like snow over your thoughts. That fear can grow roots even in the coldest soil. That belief, when mixed with power and panic, can turn even the most righteous hands into trembling weapons. Let the silence of this first part settle over you like a heavy wool blanket. You are here, you are warm, you are safe, and the story, the long unravelling, has only just begun. Tituba's confession spreads like fire on dry wood. Her voice, once soft and hesitant, becomes a strange kind of beacon in the frightened dark. She speaks of animals that speak with men's voices, of women who fly, of books bound in leather that require blood for ink. She names names, and the names she gives are ones the village already half expects to hear. Sarah Good, the beggar woman who mutters to herself, often barefoot, trailing children behind her like shadows. Sarah Osborne, old, ill, who hasn't been to church in over a year, her absence a sin as damning as any hex. These women, already living on the frayed edge of society, become perfect vessels for the fears everyone has been silently feeding. You walk the road past the meeting house, and people no longer look one another in the eye. Everyone listens now more than they speak. Every creak of wood, every sick cow, every spoiled pie becomes something more than bad luck. The girls, Betty, Abigail, Anne Putnam, Mercy Lewis, they fall deeper into their afflictions. Their limbs stiffen, their mouths twist, their words lose all shape. They accuse, they tremble, they scream, and all the while their parents, their ministers, the magistrates, men like John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, watch with narrowed eyes and ink-stained fingers. A special court is called in Salem town, a more bustling settlement than your quiet village. This court is not ordinary. It is charged with hunting witches, with finding evil rooted in human flesh, and the evidence allowed, spectral evidence, is like smoke in your hands. It means that if someone claims your spirit appeared to them in a dream, or choked them in their sleep, it is taken seriously, not laughed away, not even questioned. You don't need poppets or potions, not broomsticks or black cats, only belief. And belief, in this place and time, is more powerful than anything else. The jails fill. The jails are not what you'd imagine. They are cold, damp rooms beneath buildings, sometimes barely lit, often shared by rats. Children are imprisoned too, like Dorcas Good, Sarah's daughter, just 4 years old. She's questioned, and under pressure, she says what the adults want her to say, that her mother gave her the devil's book. Men are not spared either. Giles Corey, strong and silent, is accused alongside his wife, Martha. He does not confess. Later it will cost him dearly, but for now he watches as others falter. You begin to lose track of the days. Accusations fall in clusters, and when you walk through Salem village you hear the names whispered as if they are spells themselves. Rebecca Nurse, quiet and devout. Elizabeth Proctor, who speaks her mind and keeps to herself. Reverend George Burroughs, who once preached here and left under tension. Even when someone is respected, even when someone prays with tears and quotes scripture with trembling lips, it does not protect them. In fact, it makes them more dangerous in the eyes of the court. Who better for the devil to choose than someone who pretends to be pure? The court believes it is doing God's work. They are saving souls by condemning flesh. They call it justice. But you see something else in the eyes of those who accuse: envy, bitterness, grief that has curdled into hate. Old land disputes are remembered, grudges unearthed. The Putnams, powerful and heavy with grief after losing children to illness, are among the most fervent accusers. Their daughter, Anne Putnam Jr., sees witches everywhere, and her parents believe her, or want to. Because the alternative, that the devil is not real, that this is all human cruelty, is too terrible to face. Spring turns to early summer, and now executions begin. Bridget Bishop is the first to hang. She's a woman known for her bright clothes and sharp tongue, someone who never fit the mould. She's convicted and taken to Gallows Hill, a rocky ledge just outside town. No one wants to speak of the hanging afterward, but you hear the murmurs, that the rope was tight, that she died slowly, that the crowd was silent. No one cheered, no one prayed, just silence, the kind that fills a church when no one believes anymore. And still, the trials continue. More confessions, more accusations. Some confess to save themselves, Some refuse to lie and pay the ultimate price. Every night the jailers bring food to the cells, and every morning they pull someone else to court. And the afflicted girls, they still tremble, still point, still cry out in sudden pain. They have become a kind of chorus, one that no longer needs prompting. The village listens to them more than it does to ministers, to parents, to reason. You begin to question things you once knew. Can the devil truly enter a person and twist them so? Can he make a girl scream just by looking at someone? Can you trust your neighbours or yourself? When you pray, does God hear you or someone else? And still the list grows. More names, more shackles, more whispered confessions. The jail overflows, and Salem, once just a small village on the edge of wilderness, becomes something else entirely. A place where fear wears a face you recognise, where justice becomes a ritual, and where silence no longer means peace, it means you're next. The story, like the wind across the marshes, does not slow. Not yet. By midsummer of 1692, Salem is no longer a place you recognise. The trees still rustle, the church bells still toll, but the sounds don't carry the same meaning. They echo differently, heavier somehow. A bell once meant Sunday, or a wedding, or mourning. Now it means another trial, another verdict, another soul in peril. You move about your days like someone walking across thin ice, each step measured, every word watched. At the heart of it all is the courtroom. It's not a grand hall, not even large. It's plain, wooden, and suffocatingly hot in the July air. The windows are cracked open, but the stillness inside keeps the sweat clinging to your back. The magistrates sit at the front, Hathorne, Corwin, and now the new arrival from Boston, William Stoughton, the deputy governor. He's the kind of man who speaks with finality, whose eyes flick past pleas and explanations and settle only on guilt. You sit at the back, maybe on a bench, maybe standing by the wall. You watch and you listen. The afflicted girls are brought in, their dresses neat, their faces pale but composed, until the accused enters. Then it begins. The fits, the shrieks, the collapse into spasms and gasps. They claim to see spectres, twisted faces, claws instead of fingers. They shout that their flesh is burning, that a yellow bird is pecking at their eyes, that the accused is biting them with their spirit floating above untouchable, and the accused, usually a woman, sometimes a man, stares back, hollowed by days in prison, voice breaking from protest. I never did such things, they say. I am innocent. I know not what they speak of. But the court listens to the girls. Their pain is real. Their suffering is plain. Rebecca Nurse stands accused now. You know her. Everyone does. A grandmother, a churchgoer, a woman of calm voice and kind hands, and yet, even she stands here, facing death. When she's first found not guilty, the girls scream louder. The judge hesitates. The jury is asked to reconsider, and then the verdict is reversed. She is condemned. It's not only the accused who falter, it's the entire village. Farms go untended. Children are left to fend for themselves. The minister, Reverend Parris, still thunders about sin, but even his words sound thinner now. There is unease even among the righteous. The people who once sat together in church now sit apart. A sideways glance, an unfinished sentence, a poorly timed silence. Any of it can be interpreted. The jail, now holding more than 100, is filled with noise, murmured prayers, coughing, soft crying. The accused sleep on straw. Food is meagre. Some begin to confess, though the truth of those confessions is impossible to grasp. Take Deliverance Hobbs, for instance. She says she signed the devil's book. She says others did too. But did she truly believe it? Or did she say it to survive? You wonder, and you do not know. Outside, Gallows Hill waits. They do not bury the hanged. Their bodies are placed in shallow pits, denied consecrated ground. Families are forbidden to mourn, yet some come at night, digging with bare hands under the moonlight, stealing back what little they can of their beloved. You hear of this from neighbours and from whispers on the wind, and now more accusations reach beyond Salem village, Ipswich, Andover, Gloucester. The fever spreads like smoke between trees. No longer is it a local matter, it is a colony-wide dread. Even those who once cheered the trials begin to wonder, how many witches could there possibly be? Still, the court presses on. Stoughton presides with firm resolve. He He allows spectral evidence, those dreams, those visions, the unprovable. If a girl says she sees your spirit tormenting her, it is enough. The logic is circular. If you deny it, it proves you lie. If you confess, you confirm the court's righteousness. There is no escape. In August, 5 more are hanged. One of them is George Burroughs, the former minister. When he is on the ladder, he recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly. This should be impossible, according to Puritan belief. A witch cannot say holy words. The crowd falls silent. Some begin to doubt. But it is too late. He is pushed. The rope takes him like the others. You no longer sleep easily. Not because you fear the devil, but because you fear people who claim to speak for God. You fear that the truth has become something bendable, stretched by fear and pride. You wake in the middle of the night, sure you heard footsteps outside, or saw a face at the window, but it's only your own thoughts echoing back. You hear rumours now of people beginning to question the court, of ministers like Increase Mather and his son Cotton, who begin to warn against too much trust in invisible evidence, of quiet talk that perhaps the afflicted girls are not holy vessels but something else entirely. Still, the executions continue. The rhythm has become familiar. Accusation, arrest, trial, confession or silence, the climb up the ladder, the creak of the rope, and in the middle of it all you keep living, feeding chickens, boiling water, mending clothes. Life does not stop, even as the world reshapes itself. You wonder if it will ever go back, if the trust will return, if the fields will grow. But for now, the gallows cast a long shadow, and Salem, once small and forgotten by the world, becomes a place remembered for something terrible, and it is not over yet. By September, the air grows cooler and sharper, the first signs of autumn beginning to crisp the edges of the leaves. The sky above Salem no longer feels endless. It seems to press downward, tighter, closer. There's a stillness now, not the stillness of peace, but of exhaustion. The trials have become routine, almost mechanical. Names are given, arrests made, jailers dispatched, ropes prepared. The court functions like a machine, slow, deliberate, unforgiving. And in this rhythm of fear, something begins to crack. On the 15th of the month, Giles Corey, aged, stubborn and silent, refuses to plead. He says nothing at his arraignment. No confession, no denial, no answer at all. According to the law, if a man will not plead, he cannot be tried, and if he cannot be tried, his land cannot be seized. He knows this. He also knows that if he confesses falsely, his name is ruined, and if he is tried and found guilty, his land will pass to the state. His silence is not defiance. It is strategy, and it is love. He does it to protect his family. The punishment for silence is death by pressing. A pit is dug, boards placed on his chest, and heavy stones added one by one. You hear about it from a neighbour who has seen it, though they speak of it only once, and only in a whisper. For 2 days Giles Corey lies beneath the weight. Each time the sheriff asks for a plea, he utters the same words. More weight. You feel something stir inside you when you hear this. Not admiration, not pride, but a cold, quiet horror. This is what it has come to. An old man crushed by stones, so his sons might inherit a few acres of earth. The air in Salem grows thin. The court, so confident in early summer, now moves with a kind of haunted momentum. More people confess, but their stories grow inconsistent, their details tangled. Some begin naming the same people who already hang from the gallows. Others accuse respected figures, even members of the court. And then, on September 22nd, 8 more are hanged. Mary Easty among them, sister to Rebecca Nurse. She had written a petition before her death, asking that the court pause, that the trials be examined. She'd confessed once, out of desperation, and then recanted, saying she had lied. She asked only that no innocent person suffer as she had, but her words went unanswered. You're beginning to feel something heavy in your chest, something hard to name. It is not grief exactly, though you have lost friends and neighbours. It is not anger, though you felt that too. It is something else, an ache for reason, for quiet, for a return to what was. But what was no longer exists. And then, finally, something begins to change. A minister in Boston, Increase Mather, publishes a tract. He argues that it is better for 10 witches to go free than for one innocent to be condemned. This is not a new idea, but it is the first time someone of his influence says it out loud. People listen. Cotton Mather, his son, follows him in tone, if not entirely in content. The winds shift. Governor Phipps, returned from military duty in Maine, hears of the chaos and halts the proceedings. The Court of Oyer and Termina, the one built solely to try witches, is dissolved. A new court is formed, with stricter rules, and spectral evidence is no longer allowed. It seems like the fever is breaking, but for many it is too late. You pass by the jail one morning and hear a woman singing to herself behind the wall. Not hymns, but something older. A lullaby, maybe. Her voice is cracked and quiet, but the song carries, thin and strange on the breeze. She's still awaiting trial. No one has come for her yet. Her name may not have been called. The ground beneath Salem feels altered. Not physically, but in the way people look at it. You see it in the faces around you, in the way eyes no longer meet, in the way neighbours once warm now pass without a word. Children speak less. They've seen too much. They've heard things no child should hear. Some have watched their mothers taken away in carts. Others have watched their fathers testify against them. And through all of it, the afflicted girls remain. Their fits lessen, though no one says why. Some suggest they've been cured by the justice served. Others whisper that they no longer feel safe to perform. There is a growing murmur that they were never afflicted at all. You wonder which is worse, that they were victims of something invisible and terrible, or that they weren't. One of the judges, Nathaniel Saltonstall, had resigned early in protest, but most others remain. They do not speak of regret. Not yet. Not openly. Some still believe they were doing God's work. Others are simply quiet now. You stand in your doorway in the early morning, watching mist curl low over the fields. The harvest is weak. Many hands are missing. The village no longer rings with the usual rhythms of work and prayer and gossip. It feels as if something precious has been carved out of the land and not returned. But life, like a stream, begins to move forward again, slowly, cautiously. The court will meet once more, the last of the prisoners still to be addressed. Some will be released. Others will remain locked away until someone pays their jail fees. There is no apology, only silence. No mourning, only forgetfulness. And you, like everyone else, will continue. Not because you want to, but because there is no other